Greetings, loremasters. Tonight our chronicle covers the bone-chilling origins of Skyrim's native sons and daughters, tracing the Frostrim lineage back to a land that no longer exists, at least not in any way that supports life. We are heading north, further north than the College of Winterhold, further than the wreck of the Pride of Tel Voss, across the treacherous Sea of Ghosts to the ancestral cradle of humanity, Atmora. The history of the Nords is written in ice, blood, and the kind of stubborn resilience that borders on insanity. It's a tale of a people who looked at a frozen wasteland and said, yes, this looks like a comfortable place to raise a family. Let's be honest though, most of us complain when the thermostat dips 2 degrees below room temperature. So the idea of crossing a literal frozen ocean in an open wooden boat with nothing but furs and an axe is probably a hard pass for anyone without a heavily modded health pool. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing the global campfire we're building here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins not in Skyrim, but across the churning dark waters of the Eltharic Ocean. To understand the Nords, you have to understand what they ran from. Today, if you were to look at a map of Nirn, the continent of Atmora appears as little more than a jagged white scar at the top of the world. It is a place of absolute zero, a suspended animation of ice where time itself seems to have frozen solid. But it wasn't always this way. Long before the First Era, before the empires of men rose and fell, Atmora was green. The name itself, Atmora, derives from Altmora, which in the ancient tongue means elderwood. Close your eyes and picture it. Vast, sprawling taiga forests similar to those in the Rift, but denser, older. It was a land of hunting grounds and teeming rivers, where the early tribes of men, the ancestors of the Nords, Imperials and Bretons, waged war against each other and the merfolk who shared the world with them. It was a hard life, certainly, but it was a living one. Then the world began to change. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden magical blast that flash froze the continent, at least not that the records show. It was a slow, creeping malice. The Atmoran freeze is perhaps the most significant climate event in the history of Nirn, yet it is rarely discussed by the scholars in Cyrodiil, who are too busy arguing over tax codes. Imagine living in that transition. The winters started lasting longer. The spring thaw arrived weeks late, then months late, until one year it simply didn't arrive at all. The great elder woods began to die. Trees shattered under the weight of unmelting. Snow. The game animals migrated south or froze in their burrows. The Nords, a people defined by their ability to endure, tried to outlast the weather. They built deeper hearths, burned more timber, and huddled closer together. But you cannot fight a glacier with a woodcutter's axe. This environmental pressure cooker forced the early Atmorans into a state of perpetual civil war. As resources dwindled, the clans turned on one another. If you can't hunt deer, you raid your neighbour's grain stores. It was a brutal survival of the fittest scenario that honed the Nords into the terrifying warriors we know today. They didn't develop their martial culture for glory. They developed it because the weak froze to death or starved. It's a bit like playing on legendary difficulty from the moment you're born. If you survive the tutorial, you're already harder than anything else the world can throw at you. This slow apocalypse sparked the Exodus. We often think of Ysgramor leading the charge, and we'll get to him, but the migration from Atmora to Tamriel took place over hundreds of years. It was a steady stream of refugees fleeing a dying continent. They piled into longships, vessels built from the last of the great Atmoran oaks, and pushed into the Sea of Ghosts. Now, here is a core in-game fact you've likely seen on a loading screen while waiting for Whiterun to render. The Nords believe that Kyne, the goddess of the storm, breathed them into existence at the throat of the world. They believe they are returning to Skyrim, not invading it. This return ideology is crucial. To them, fleeing Atmora wasn't just an escape, it was a divine repatriation. They weren't refugees begging for asylum, they were rightful heirs coming home to claim their inheritance. It's a convenient narrative when you're about to displace the elves already living there, but we'll get to the morality of that later. The journey across the Sea of Ghosts was a nightmare in its own right. The waters between Atmora and Tamriel are treacherous, filled with icebergs the size of cities and storms that can snap a keel in half. Thousands died in the crossing. The ocean floor there is likely paved with the bones of Atmorans, who simply couldn't make the voyage. Those who did make it landed on the northern coasts of Skyrim, Sarek Head, the Broken Cape, shivering, wet, and desperate. But what of Atmora itself? What happened to those who stayed behind? This brings us to a piece of obscure lore that sends a chill down the spine. In the Pocket Guide to the Empire, 3rd edition, there is a mention of expeditions returning to Atmora in the early years of the First Era. The last known ships to arrive from Atmora docked in the year 1E68. The ships were filled with corpses, but more disturbing are the reports from those who tried to sail back to Atmora. They describe a land where the cold is unnatural. It isn't just weather anymore, it is a magical stasis. The trees are still there, perfectly preserved in ice. The animals are frozen mid-stride. It is a snapshot of a dead world. This leads to a fascinating fan theory and community debate that has raged on forums for years. Is Atmora merely frozen in temperature, or is it frozen in time? The theory suggests that as you go further north on Neon, time slows down and eventually stops. This aligns with the metaphysical concepts of Anu and Padome, Anu being stasis and light, often associated with the cold north. If this is true, the Nords didn't just flee a blizzard, they fled the cessation of existence. They ran from the end of time itself. It adds a layer of cosmic horror to their history, doesn't it? It implies that the Nords are the people who outran the pause button. As the ships landed on the jagged coastlines of what is now Winterhold and Eastmarch, the Atmorans found a land that was harsh, yes, but alive. There were flowing rivers, there were green valleys in the south. To a people who had watched their world turn white and die, Skyrim must have looked like a paradise. A rugged, bear-infested, dragon-haunted paradise, but paradise nonetheless. They brought with them their culture, their animistic gods, and their steel. But they also brought the memory of the ice. You can see it in their architecture even today, the thick stone walls, the obsession with fire, the way every Nord hall is designed to be a fortress against the cold. They never forgot the lesson Atmora taught them, that the world is cruel and warmth is a luxury you have to fight for. The psychological impact of the freezing of Atmora cannot be overstated. It embedded a deep-seated fatalism in the Nordic psyche. They expect the world to end. They expect the cold to win eventually. This is why they drink so much mead and sing so loudly. They are shouting defiance at the encroaching silence. Its very rage against the dying of the light, if the light was also a blizzard trying to freeze your eyelids shut. This migration set the stage for the first great conflict on Tamrielic soil involving humans. The Atmorans were not a monolithic block, they were distinct tribes, but the harshness of the journey united them under a common purpose: survival. They settled in the north, founding the earliest version of Sarthal. At this point, they were not yet Nords in the modern sense, they were Atmorans living in Skyrim. The distinction is subtle but important. They were taller, broader, and lived significantly longer than modern Imperials or Bretons. Some lore suggests the pure-blooded Atmorans were practically giants compared to the men of today. But this new land was not empty. As they felled trees to build their first longhouses, they were watched. From the gleaming white stone cities carved into the cliffs, and from the deep fungal forest below, the elves, the Falmer, observed these newcomers. The Falmer were sophisticated, magical, and established. They looked at these hairy, unwashed barbarians stumbling off their boats with a mix of curiosity and disdain. The tragedy of Atmora is that it created a people who were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. The Atmorans weren't looking for coexistence, they were looking for a stronghold. They had just lost one world, they weren't about to lose another. The freezing winds of their homeland had stripped away their mercy, leaving only the hard, cold core of survival instinct. So, as the last of the Atmoran ships were dragged onto the rocky beaches, and the fires of Sarthal were lit for the first time, the stage was set for a clash of civilizations. The Atmorans believed this land was theirs by divine right, a gift from Kine to replace what the Frost had stolen. The Elves believed it was theirs by right of ancient tenure. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The Atmorans, traumatized by the death of their continent, were hyper-protective of their new holdings. They built walls not just to keep the wind out, but to keep the unknown at bay. They were refugees who had become conquerors out of necessity. The heritage of Atmora is not just a genetic lineage, it is a philosophy of endurance. It is the understanding that comfort is temporary and that winter is always coming. It is the reason why, thousands of years later, a guard in Whiterun will complain about the cold, but refuse to wear a helmet that covers his ears. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits were formed during a magically induced ice age. As the settlements grew, the memory of the Elder Wood faded into legend. Atmora became a ghost story, a place where only the dead reside, but the Nords kept the name alive in their titles. Ysgramor of Atmora, the 500 of Atmora. It became a badge of honour, a signifier that you were forged in the harshest conditions Nirn could offer. But peace, as it often does in Tamriel, proved to be fragile. The Snow Elves, initially tolerant or perhaps just dismissive of the human settlers, began to realise that these Atmorans were breeding fast and expanding faster. The humans were aggressive, loud, and wielded strange magics and strong steel. The tension began to rise, thick as the fog on the Sea of Ghosts. And then, something was found deep beneath Saarthal, something that the elves desperately wanted, or perhaps desperately feared. We will touch on that, but for now, imagine the city of Saarthal in its prime. It wasn't the ruin you delve into during the College of Winterhold questline. It was a bustling metropolis of wood and stone, the first capital of men in Skyrim. It was the symbol of hope that the Atmorans could start over. Families raised children who had never seen the dying forests of Atmora. Children who knew only the skies of Tamriel. They thought they were safe. They thought they had outrun the doom that swallowed their homeland. They were wrong. The freezing of Atmora was just the first tragedy. The second was about to happen in the dead of night, under the light of the moons, when the Snow Elves decided that the Atmoran problem needed a permanent solution. The cold of Atmora had hardened the Nords, but the fires of Saarthal would forge them into something else entirely. A weapon of vengeance. The night Saarthal burned, the sky over Winterhold wasn't lit by the Aurora Borealis, but by the orange glow of genocide. To understand the Night of Tears, you have to realise that until that moment, the relationship between the Snow Elves and the Atmoran settlers was tense but manageable. It was a cold war of sorts. The elves, in their gleaming white armour and intricate palaces, looked down on the Atmorans as primitive squatters. The Atmorans in turn viewed the elves as fey, arrogant and suspicious. But they coexisted, they traded, they kept to their own territories. Then came the spark. We know the story, or at least the version the Nords tell over their mead. The treacherous elves, jealous of human vitality, or perhaps just our ability to grow beards, attacked without warning, slaughtering every man, woman and child in Saarthal. Only Ysgramor and his two sons, Ingol and Ilgar, escaped to flee back to Atmora. It's a classic underdog story. The innocent victims, the evil aggressors, the miraculous escape. But let's pause and look at a core in-game fact that changes the texture of this narrative. During the College of Winterhold questline, deep within the ruins of Saarthal you discover the Eye of Magnus. This massive floating orb of immense magical power was buried there. The Nords found it. They started digging it up. The Snow Elves, who are far more magically attuned than the humans, likely sensed the danger, or the opportunity. This leads to a widely discussed fan theory. The Night of Tears wasn't an act of unprovoked racial hatred. It was a preemptive strike to secure a weapon of mass destruction. The elves didn't attack Saarthal to kill humans. They attacked to contain the Eye of Magnus. They saw these primitive Atmorans playing with a cosmic nuke and decided to intervene. It doesn't justify the slaughter of civilians, of course, but it changes the motive from mindless evil to ruthless pragmatism. It's the difference between a serial killer and a desperate government agency covering up a hazardous spill. Regardless of the motive, the result was absolute carnage. The city was levelled. The Snow Elves were thorough. They didn't just want to defeat the Atmorans, they wanted to erase them. They wanted to ensure that no human would ever dare to set foot on Skyrim soil again. They failed. Ysgramor, the first great hero of the Nords, managed to slip away. Imagine the fury of that man. He wasn't just a refugee anymore. He was a father who had watched his people burn. He sailed back to Atmora, to a land that was already dying, and he didn't bring a sob story. He brought a call to arms. He told the tribes of the massacre. He showed them the blood on his axe. And the Atmorans, who were already fighting a losing battle against the ice, found a new enemy they could actually hit. The ice was an indifferent killer. The elves were a target. Ysgramor didn't need to conscript soldiers, he had volunteers. Thus formed the 500 companions. Now, 500 sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of an invasion it's tiny, it's a battalion. But these weren't just 500 random guys with swords. These were the greatest heroes, the deadliest warriors, and the most potent tongues of Atmora. They were the avatars of war. Each one was a legend in their own right, a hero unit, if you will. They sailed back to Tamriel, not to settle, but to exterminate. This is the part of Nordic history that gets glossed over with heroic songs, but let's be real, it was a brutal, systematic campaign of genocide. The return wasn't a battle, it was a grinder. The companions landed and cut a swath through the snow elf civilization. They didn't just retake Sarthal, they hunted the Falmer across the continent. Ysgramor wielded Wuthrad, the legendary battle axe you can reconstruct in the game. Look closely at Wuthrad next time you're in the companion's questline, the face on the axe is screaming, and the enchantment, extra damage to elves. It's a weapon designed for racial purging. It's grim, it's dark, and it's undeniably effective. One piece of obscure lore comes from the Songs of the Return, a series of books you can find scattered around Skyrim. It details the specific exploits of the companions. It mentions names like Rocco the Sprinter, who ran so fast he could scout ahead of the army and return before they realised he'd left, or Gurat the Smith, who forged weapons on the deck of a ship during a storm. These snippets paint a picture of a force that was mythic in scale. They weren't just fighting, they were performing feats of strength that defied logic. But it wasn't a cakewalk. The snow elves were powerful. They had magic that could reshape the land. The war lasted for generations. Ysgramor died before it was finished, but his legacy was a momentum that couldn't be stopped. The elves were pushed back, battle by battle, stronghold by stronghold. They were driven from the sunny valleys of the Rift, from the plains of Whiterun, and finally into the high mountains and the deep places of the earth. This war broke the snow elf civilization. It shattered their culture, their religion, and their spirit. Desperate and on the brink of extinction, they sought refuge with the Dwemer, the dwarves, who lived deep underground. And we all know how that deal went. The Dwemer, pragmatic and cruel, offered sanctuary in exchange for the Falmer's sight and servitude. The Nords didn't turn the snow elves into the blind monsters you fight in Blackreach. The Dwemer did. But the Nords drove them to the door. The genocide of the Falmer is the foundational sin of Skyrim. The beautiful Nordic cities, the proud lineage of the Jarls, the very concept of Skyrim belongs to the Nords. It's all built on the ashes of an older, elegant civilization that was hunted to the brink of non-existence. It's a heavy legacy. Yet, amidst the bloodshed, there were moments of profound sorrow. Ysgramor's own son, Ingol, did not survive the landing. His ship was separated during the crossing and crashed on the northern coast. When Ysgramor finally found the wreck, he found his son dead. In his grief, Ysgramor killed a dozen sea ghosts, likely slaughterfish or perhaps something more supernatural, and built a tomb for his son. Ingol's Barrow is one of the most atmospheric dungeons in the game, filled with bouncing blue balls of light that are presumably the spirits of his crew. The Night of Tears and the subsequent return defined the Nord identity as warriors. It taught them that peace is a fragile illusion, and that the only thing you can trust is the steel in your hand and the kin at your back. It solidified their hatred of elves, a prejudice that lingers thousands of years later. When a Stormcloak soldier spits the word elf, he isn't just reacting to the Thalmor, he's channeling a cultural trauma that dates back to the burning of Sarthal. But there is a strange irony here. The Nords, who value honour and bravery above all else, won their land through a campaign that was, by modern standards, horrific. They celebrate Ysgramor as a hero, a saviour, and from their perspective he was. He saved the human race from extinction. If the elves had wiped out the Sarthal refugees and then blockaded the coast, humanity might never have established a foothold in Tamriel. We might have died out in the freezing wastes of Atmora. So, was Ysgramor a hero or a monster? In the world of the Elder Scrolls, the answer is usually yes. The legacy of the 500 companions is everywhere in Skyrim. The city of Whiterun is built around the Jorvaskr, the upside-down longship of one of the companion crews. The circle of the companions still follows the traditions laid down by Ysgramor. They are the living memory of the return. But as the Nords settled in, securing their borders and building their holds, a shadow was growing within their own ranks. The Atmorans had brought their gods with them, yes. They worshipped the hawk, the wolf, the moth. But above all, they worshipped the dragon. In Atmora, the dragon cult had been the ruling religious body. But in the chaos of the migration and the war with the elves, the cult's power had been unchecked. The dragon priests, once the mediators between men and the Dova, began to tighten their grip. They saw the new land not just as a place to live, but as a kingdom to rule. The transition from the heroic age of Ysgramor to the tyrannical age of the dragon cult was subtle. It started with tribute. A little grain here, a little labour there, to ensure the dragons kept the wolves away and the crops growing. But power is an addiction, and the dragon priests were heavy users. The Nords had defeated the elves, but they were about to find that their next great enemy was already inside the house. The dragons were not content to be distant gods. They wanted to be kings, and their priests were all too happy to hold the whip. The Night of Tears was a tragedy of fire and blood, but it was just the prologue. The Nords had secured their land, but they had not yet secured their freedom. They had traded the freezing death of Atmora for the fiery wrath of the Dova, and as the cities of men rose from the ruins of the Falmer, the shadows of dragon wings began to stretch long across the tundra. The dust had barely settled on the Falmer ruins when the shadow of the wing fell across Skyrim. The Nords had fought for their survival against the ice, and then against the elves. They had won a home, but the price of that home was servitude. In the early days of the Merethic era, there was no High King of Skyrim in the way we think of it now. There were no Jarls slouching on thrones debating tax policy. There was only the cult. To understand the dragon cult, you have to strip away the modern imperial pantheon, forget the benevolent 8 or 9 divines. The ancient Nords were animists. They worshipped the totems, the hawk, the wolf, the snake, the moth, the owl, the whale, the bear, the fox, and the dragon. In this hierarchy, the dragon was supreme. Not because he was kind, or wise, or loving, but because he was strong. In the Atmoran worldview might makes right. The dragons were the undisputed apex predators of creation. They were immortal, powerful, and commanded the very fabric of reality with their voices. It made sense to worship them. It was a worship born of awe and terror. The dragon priests were the intermediaries. These were powerful mages, Nords who had been granted a fraction of the dragon's power in exchange for absolute loyalty. They wore the masks we all know and covet, Hevnorak, Otar, Morokei. These weren't just fashion statements, they were badges of office and conduits of magical authority. For a long time, this system worked. The dragons were distant overlords. They didn't care about the day-to-day squabbles of mortals. As long as the tribute flowed and the reverence was paid, they spent their time doing dragon things, debating philosophy, dominating the skies, and sleeping on mountaintops. The priests ran the show. But power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In Atmora, the cult had been balanced by the harshness of life. Everyone had to pull together to survive. In Skyrim, with its relative abundance, the priests had more room to indulge their egos. They began to rule with an iron fist. The capital of this theological empire was Bromjunar, known today as Labyrinthian. If you've walked through those ruins, you've felt the weight of it. The massive stone structures, the sheer scale of the architecture. It was built to intimidate. It was a statement. We are the masters of this world. A core in-game fact that players encounter is the sheer number of Draugr in the barrows. Ever wonder why there are so many? Under the cult, the population was essentially a workforce for death. The Nords were conscripted to build massive temples and tombs for the priests and the dragons. When a priest died, his followers were killed and interred with him to serve him in the afterlife. It was a death cult in the truest sense. The economy of early Skyrim was driven by the manufacturing of corpses. But the tyranny wasn't just about labour, it was about fear. The priests demanded tribute, and when grain and gold weren't enough, they demanded blood. The dragons, for all their supposed divinity, were cruel masters. Alduin, the World Eater, was the king of them all. He had forsaken his role as the destroyer of the world to become its ruler. He wanted to dominate, not unmake. This deviation is a crucial piece of obscure lore. According to Paarthurnax and other ancient sources, Alduin's lordship was a perversion of the natural order. Akatosh, or Bormahu as the dragons call him, created dragons to be dominant, yes, but Alduin took it a step further. He claimed godhood for himself. This arrogance is what eventually led to his downfall, but for centuries, he was the terrifying reality of daily life. Imagine being a Nord in this era. You wake up, you work the fields, and you look up at the sky in fear. If a shadow passes over the sun, you drop to your knees. If a priest walks into your village, you offer him your best livestock, or perhaps your daughter, and pray he leaves without burning your house down. There was no recourse, no guards to call. The guards worked for the priests. The cruelty reached a breaking point. The priests became more erratic, more demanding. The Dragon War didn't start because the Nords wanted democracy. It started because they were being pushed into extinction by their own gods. There's a fascinating fan theory regarding the masks of the dragon priests. Each mask is made of a strange unknown metal and hums with magical energy. Some theorize that the masks themselves are parasitic entities, possibly Daedric in origin, that slowly consumed the wearer's humanity. It would explain why the priests, who were once men, became undead liches obsessed with eternal rule. They traded their souls for the power to oppress their kin. The spark of rebellion was lit not by a warrior, but by the suffering of the common folk. It was a desperate, hopeless uprising. How do you fight a dragon? Your sword bounces off its scales. Your arrows burn in the air. Its voice can tear your soul from your body. It was suicide. But the Nords are nothing if not stubborn. They fought, and they died. Thousands of them. The rebellion would have been crushed in weeks if not for a divine intervention, or rather, a defect in the dragon ranks. Kine, the hawk goddess, the widow of Shor, looked down on her favoured people and took pity. She is the mother of Nords, the storm that brings the rain, and the wind that fills the lungs. She saw her children being slaughtered by the children of Akatosh, and she decided to intervene. But she couldn't fight the dragons directly. She needed a proxy. Enter Paarthurnax. The name means Ambition Overlord Cruelty. He was Alduin's younger brother and his chief lieutenant. He had committed atrocities in Alduin's name, but something changed in him. Perhaps he saw the futility of eternal domination. Perhaps Kine whispered to him on the wind. Or perhaps, as he says himself, he simply overcame his nature through great effort. Paarthurnax betrayed his brother. He descended from the throat of the world not to burn the rebels, but to teach them. This was the turning point. This was the moment humanity was given the fire. He taught them the Thu'um. Until this moment, the voice was the exclusive domain of the dragons. It was their language, their debate, their weapon. For a human to speak it was heresy. But Paarthurnax, along with a few other dissident dragons, taught the first tongues, Gormleth Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye and Felder the Old, how to shout. It wasn't easy. Dragon language is intrinsic to dragon souls. For a human to learn it, they have to internalize the concept of the word so deeply that it becomes reality. To shout fire, you have to be the fire. You have to understand the essence of burning so completely that the universe has no choice but to ignite. The first time a human shouted back at a dragon, the shock must have been palpable. Imagine a dragon swooping down to roast a group of peasants, only to have one of those peasants stand up, open their mouth, and blast the dragon out of the sky with a shockwave of pure sonic force. The dynamic shifted instantly. The ants had found a megaphone. The Dragon War exploded into a full-scale cataclysm. It wasn't just a rebellion anymore. It was a civil war among the gods. Dragons fought dragons in the skies above Skyrim. Shouts tore the mountains apart. The valleys were filled with the broken bodies of Dova and men alike. This was the era of the Dragonborn, though the term wasn't used in the same way then. These were the tongues, mortal warriors who could speak the language of creation. They were terrifying in their own right. They didn't just kill dragons. They devoured their power, absorbing their souls to fuel their own strength. It was a brutal meritocracy. If you could kill a dragon, you deserved its power. The tide began to turn. The dragon priests were hunted down. Their temples were besieged. Bromjunar was sacked. The Nords, fueled by generations of suppressed rage and newfound power, were unstoppable. They tore down the statues of Alduin and smashed the altars of sacrifice. But Alduin was still a god. He could not be killed by conventional means. He was the World Eater. His power was infinite. The three heroes, Gormley, Hakon and Feldir, faced him at the summit of the throat of the world. They knew they couldn't beat him in a straight fight. They needed a trump card. They used an Elder Scroll. This is the moment depicted in the main quest of Skyrim. They created the dragon-rend shout, a shout so hateful, so antithetical to a dragon's nature, that it forced the concept of mortality into their immortal minds. It grounded Alduin. But even that wasn't enough to kill him. So in a desperate act, they used the Elder Scroll to cast him adrift in the currents of time. They didn't kill the devil, they just banished him to the future, to our time. With Alduin gone, the dragon cult collapsed. The remaining dragons were hunted to near extinction, or went into hiding. The dragon priests retreated into their barrows, sealing themselves away with their Draugr servants, waiting for the return of their lord. They became the Lich Kings we fight today, sleeping in dust and darkness, dreaming of the day the World Eater would return to reclaim his kingdom. The Dragon War left scars on the land that never healed. The ruins that dot the landscape are the bones of that conflict. But it also defined the Nords' relationship with magic. They saw what magic did in the hands of the priests. They saw how the clever men and the mages had been the enforcers of tyranny. This is why modern Nords distrust magic. It's not just superstition, it's historical trauma. To a Nord, a mage isn't just a scholar, he's a potential dragon priest in the making. Go cast your fancy magic someplace else isn't just an insult, it's a cultural defense mechanism. They remember when magic meant slavery. The overthrow of the dragon cult was the birth of Skyrim as a human nation. It was the moment the Nords declared that they would bow to no god that demanded their knees in the dirt. They would worship the gods who stood beside them in the shield wall, but the voice remained. It was the weapon that won the war, but it was a dangerous tool. Without the dragons to regulate it, the Nords began to use it against each other. The tongues became warlords. The shouts that were meant to liberate were used to conquer. The cycle of violence was starting again. The Nords had freed themselves from the dragons, but they hadn't freed themselves from the lust for power. The mountains of Skyrim would echo with the voice for centuries to come, not in prayer, but in battle. And it would take a great failure to teach them the true meaning of the gift Paarthurnax had given them. With the dragons banished and the priesthood shattered, you might expect the Nords to settle down, plant some leeks, and enjoy a few centuries of quiet farming. But if you know anything about Nords, you know that quiet isn't really in their vocabulary. The end of the Dragon War didn't bring peace, it brought the era of the tongues. The power vacuum left by Alduin was massive, but the Nords filled it with something equally loud, their own voices. We need to talk about what the Thu'um actually is, because the game mechanics of Skyrim, press a button, things go boom, don't quite do justice to the metaphysical horror of what's happening. When a Nord shouts, they aren't casting a spell. They aren't pulling magicka from the Aetherius like a Breton wizard in a bathrobe. They are projecting their vital essence, their inner breath, onto the world with such force that reality itself is compelled to obey. This is obscure lore territory, bordering on the concept of tonal architecture used by the Dwemer. The universe of the Elder Scrolls is built on sound, on the music of the Orbi. To shout is to sing a note so powerful that it overwrites the local song of reality. When you shout fire, you aren't creating fire, you're debating the universe and convincing it that the air in front of you is fire, and because your will is stronger, the universe concedes the point. This power was seen as a direct gift from Kyne. While the modern Imperial Pantheon tries to smooth things over by placing Akatosh at the top of the pyramid, the ancient Nords knew who their real mother was. Kyne, the widow of Shor, the goddess of the storm. She's the fierce warrior wife deity who looked at the shivering Atmorans and breathed her own power into them. There is a fascinating fan theory that circulates in lore communities regarding the true nature of the Dragonborn and the tongues. The theory posits that the Dragonborn blessing isn't actually from Akatosh at all, but from Kyne. Akatosh is the dragon god of time, representing stasis and domination, everything the dragon cult stood for. Kyne represents the storm, change, and the freedom of men. Why would the dragon god grant mortals the power to kill his own children? It makes more sense that Kyne, the protector of humanity, armed her children to fight back. The dragon blood might be Akatosh's realm, but the breath, the ability to shout, is pure Kyne. Under the banner of the voice, the Nords didn't just rebuild, they expanded. This was the birth of the first empire of the Nords. It was a golden age of violence. Imagine an army where every general, every siege engineer and every elite shock trooper could blow down a stone wall by yelling at it. King Vraig the Gifted, one of Ysgramor's descendants, looked at the map of Tamriel and decided it looked a bit too non-Nordic. In a span of 50 years, the Nords conquered the entirety of Skyrim, then pushed into High Rock to the west and Morrowind to the east. They didn't use trebuchets, they used tongues. Here is a core in-game fact. If you read the etched tablets on the 70,000 steps leading to High Hrothgar, they tell the story of these conquests. They speak of the voice being the glory of the Nords. It wasn't a spiritual discipline back then, it was artillery. The tongues were the rock stars of this era. They were warlords who roamed the battlefield, their voices cracking the sky. But there was a cost. Using the voice physically taxes the body. It requires a massive expenditure of life force. Tales from this era describe tongues who were so powerful they couldn't speak normally for fear of accidentally destroying their own homes. They had to be gagged or sworn to silence, communicating only through sign language or scribes, unleashed only when it was time to level a city. This militarization of the voice created a culture of extreme arrogance. The Nords began to believe they were invincible. After all, they had defeated the dragons. They had defeated the elves. They had the power of the gods in their lungs. Who could stop them? They rolled over the Tyranny hegemony in High Rock. Though the Tyranny were magic users of the highest order, even they struggled against the sheer blunt force of the Thuum. They pushed the Chimera and the Dwemer back into the ashlands of Morrowind. The Nordic Empire stretched from the western reach to the inner sea. It was the largest human empire Tamriel had ever seen up to that point, predating the Alessian Empire of Cyrodiil. But this expansion wasn't just about land, it was about ideology. The Nords felt they were the Sky Children, the chosen people of Kine, destined to rule the North. This religious zealotry made them terrifying occupiers. They weren't just conquering you, they were liberating you with the storm. During this time, the city of Windhelm became the jewel of the North. The Palace of the Kings, which stands today, was the seat of this vast empire. If you walk through Windhelm now, it feels grim, cold, and a bit claustrophobic. But try to imagine it in the First Era. Banners snapping in the wind, longships arriving from conquered lands laden with plunder, and the air constantly vibrating with the practice, shouts of aspiring tongues. It was a city of thunder. However, the Nords' reliance on the voice became their crutch. They stopped developing other forms of warfare. They neglected traditional magic, which they distrusted anyway, and subtle diplomacy. Why negotiate when you can shout someone off a cliff? They became a hammer in a world that was increasingly full of screws. The most famous of these militant tongues was a man named Jurgen Windcaller. At this stage in his life, he wasn't the pacifist monk we know. He was a warlord. He was a general of the First Empire, a man who believed that the voice was a tool of conquest given by the gods to ensure Nordic supremacy. He was strong, arrogant, and undefeated. He led his armies deep, into Morrowind, then called Restane, intent on crushing the alliance of the Chimera and the Dwemer once and for all. The Chimera, ancestors of the Dark Elves, and the Dwemer, dwarves, were mortal enemies usually. But nothing brings people together like a horde of screaming barbarians at the gates. The Chimera leader, Indoril Nerevar, and the Dwemer king, Dumak Dwarf King, formed the first council to stop the Nordic advance. The stage was set for a clash that would redefine the history of Tamriel. On one side, the Nordic Empire, fueled by the voice and the belief in their own invincibility. On the other, the desperate alliance of elves, wielding the profane tonal science of the Dwemer and the Daedric magic of the Chimera. This leads us to the foot of Red Mountain. The Nords call it the Battle of Red Mountain, though the timeline here gets very, very messy due to the Dragon Break. A temporal phenomenon we'll save for a later headache. For the Nords, this was supposed to be the crowning victory. They marched into the ash wastes, their tongues ready to shout the volcano itself into submission. But they had underestimated their enemy. The Dwemer didn't fight with courage, they fought with math. They used tonal architecture, the same principle as the shout, but weaponized through machines rather than lungs. And the Chimera? They had the Tribunal, Almalexia, Sothasil and Vivek, living gods in the making. The Nords walked into a meat grinder. The defeat was catastrophic. It wasn't just that they lost the battle, it was how they lost it. Their greatest weapon, the voice, failed them. Against the sophisticated tonal manipulation of the Dwemer and the sorcery of the Chimera, the shouts of the Nords were countered, silenced, or simply ineffective. The breath of Kine was choked out by the ash of Vardenfell. This defeat broke the back of the First Empire of the Nords. They were driven out of Morrowind, then High Rock revolted, and soon the Empire crumbled back to the borders of Skyrim. It was a humiliation on a national scale. For Jurgen Windcaller, it was an existential crisis. He survived the slaughter, but he returned to Skyrim a broken man. He couldn't understand it. If the voice was a gift from the gods to conquer, why had they lost? Had Kine abandoned them? Or, and this was the terrifying thought, had they misunderstood the gift entirely? The Breath of Kine section of history ends in silence. The roaring expansion of the Nords hit a wall, and the echo of that impact shattered their worldview. The tongues had proven that they could build an empire, but they also proved they couldn't hold it. The gods, it seemed, were not interested in a map painted entirely blue. As the Nords licked their wounds, a strange quiet fell over the land. The shouting stopped. The aggressive expansion halted. The people looked to their leaders for answers, but the leaders were dead or disgraced. The stage was cleared for a radical reinvention of Nordic philosophy. The warrior culture had hit its limit. It was time for the mystic to take over. Jurgen Windcaller sat in his hall staring at the fire, replaying the screams of Red Mountain in his head. He realized that the voice was strong, but the Nords were weak. They had used a sacred instrument as a cudgel. He began to meditate. He began to listen to the silence between the heartbeats of the world, and in that silence, he heard a new truth. A truth that would change Skyrim from a land of conquerors to a land of guardians. The age of conquest was over. The way of the voice was about to begin. Jurgen Windcaller's crisis of faith is perhaps the most pivotal moment in Nordic history since the return. Imagine the scene. A general who has spent his entire life believing that his shouting is the will of the gods, suddenly realizing that he's been shouting the wrong words. After the humiliation at Red Mountain, Jurgen didn't just retire, he went on a spiritual walkabout. He wandered the tundra for 7 years. He meditated on the nature of the voice. He asked the hard question, why did we fail? The answer he arrived at was both simple and revolutionary. The voice, he concluded, was not meant for conquest. It was meant for the worship of the gods. The gods had punished the Nords for their hubris. By using the Thuum to expand their borders and subjugate their neighbours, they had profaned the gift. The voice was worship, not a weapon. This philosophy became known as the Way of the Voice. Jurgen returned to society not as a warlord but as a pacifist. This did not go over well. You have to remember, Skyrim was a martial culture. Telling a Nord to stop fighting is like telling a fish to stop swimming. Telling a powerful tongue that he could no longer use his voice to blast his enemies was seen as heresy, cowardice, and madness. 17 powerful tongues, rival warlords who still clung to the old ways, challenged Jurgen. They called him out. They told him to meet them on the slopes of the mountain to settle this pacifist nonsense the old-fashioned way. This leads to the event known as the 7,000 Steps Showdown. It wasn't a fistfight, it was a shout-off. The 17 tongues unleashed their most destructive shouts at Jurgen. They rained fire, frost, and force upon him. For 3 days they shouted themselves hoarse, and for 3 days Jurgen just stood there. He didn't fight back, he didn't attack, he simply swallowed the shouts. This is a piece of core in-game fact lore that you hear about from the Greybeards, but let's analyse the mechanics. Jurgen had mastered a level of the voice that was purely defensive. He used the Thuum to create a null zone, a space where the aggressive tonal manipulations of his enemies were grounded out. He didn't defeat them with strength, he defeated them with stillness. When the 17 tongues finally collapsed from exhaustion, Jurgen spoke. The wind grew calm, the mountain stopped shaking, and the tongues, realizing the superiority of his understanding, bowed to him. They became his first disciples. Jurgen Windcaller built his monastery at the top of the highest mountain in Tamriel, the throat of the world. He called it High Hrothgar. He founded the Order of the Greybeards, dedicated to the study of the voice for the sole purpose of praising the gods. This shift changed Skyrim forever. The Thuum, once the common artillery of every Nordic army, began to fade from the battlefield. It became a secluded, mystical art. The Nords went back to using axes and swords, weapons, that didn't require a lifetime of meditation to master. However, this transition creates a fascinating tension. that still exist in the game. We, the players, are the Dragonborn. We use the voice for violence constantly. We are, by definition, violating the way of the voice. Arngir, the lead Greybeard, constantly chides us for this. He tells us that the Dragonborn is an exception, but a dangerous one. There is a fan theory that suggests the Greybeards are actually holding Skyrim back. By hoarding the knowledge of the voice and refusing to teach it for defense, except in the direst of circumstances, they allowed the Nords to become weaker. If the Stormcloaks had a regiment of tongues, the civil war would be over in a week. Critics of the Greybeards argue that Jurgen Windcaller's pacifism was an overcorrection, a trauma response to Red Mountain that neutered the Nordic spirit. But the Greybeards would argue that power without wisdom is exactly what caused the dragon cult and the disaster at Red Mountain. They sit on their mountain, meditating on a single word for years, ensuring that when they do speak, the world doesn't crack in half. Jurgen Windcaller eventually died, as all mortals do. His tomb, Ustengrav, is a massive, sprawling complex in the swamps of Hjalmarch. It's one of the few dungeons in the game that feels truly respectful. The Draugr there aren't just mindless zombies, they are his eternal honour guard. Now, here is an obscure lore tidbit. In Ustengrav, there are thrones facing the tomb of Jurgen. If you look closely, you can see that the layout implies a gathering place for the tongues. It is said that even in death, Jurgen holds court. The horn you retrieve, the horn of Jurgen Windcaller, is imbued with his essence. But notice something strange. When you return the horn to the tomb to get the dragon soul, the altar gives you a soul, but there is no dragon corpse. Where did that soul come from? Some believe it is a remnant of Jurgen's own power, gifted to his successor. The establishment of the Greybeards effectively removed the Nords from the superpower table of Tamrielic politics. Without the weaponized voice, the First Empire crumbled completely. Skyrim became a regional power, strong but contained. The rest of the continent breathed a sigh of relief. But the secrets of the ancient Nords weren't all locked away in High Hrothgar. While Jurgen was meditating on the peaks, down in the valleys, another older power was still burning. A power that predated the tongues, predated the dragon cult, and perhaps even predated the arrival of humans. We turn our eyes to Whiterun, specifically to the Skyforge. You've walked past it 100 times, the massive stone eagle, the strange blue flame that never goes out and requires no fuel. It sits above the Jorvasker, the mead hall of the Companions. We are told that the Companions founded Whiterun because they found the Skyforge there. Think about that. The forge was already there. Who built it? It wasn't the Snow Elves. Their architecture is delicate, crystalline. The Skyforge is brutal, heavy, and ancient. It wasn't the Dwemer. There are no gears, no steam, no brass. The Skyforge represents a mystery that goes back to the dawn of the Merethic era, or perhaps the Dawn era itself. It is a locus of old magic. The Nords, for all their distrust of wizards, revere smithing. To a Nord, a blacksmith is a type of magician. They take raw earth and turn it into death. The Skyforge is the ultimate expression of this. When Yorland Greymane says, the Skyforge feels awake, he isn't being poetic. The forge seems to have a semi-sentience. It responds to the death of great heroes. In the game, after Kodlak Whitemane dies, the forge burns hotter. It allows you to forge Nord hero weapons and ancient Nord armour. It connects the living to the dead. There is a connection here to the Underforge, the secret chamber beneath the Skyforge where the Circle of the Companions perform their beast blood rituals. But the forge predates the werewolves. The lycanthropy was a later addition, a curse, gift from Hircine. The forge itself is something elemental. Some lore scholars speculate that the Skyforge is a remnant of the Eilnefae, the Earthbones, the ancestors of both men and elves who stabilized the physical world during the Dawn era. If this is true, the Skyforge might be one of the anchors of reality in Skyrim. It is a place where the barrier between the mundane and the mythic is thin. The Nords of Whiterun have built their entire identity around this blue fire. They don't worship it, but they respect it. It is the heart of the Hold, and it serves as a reminder that even before the Dragonborn, before the Greybeards, and before the Empire, there were powers in Skyrim that defied explanation. So we have the Greybeards on the mountain, guarding the spiritual power of the voice, and we have the Companions in the valley, guarding the physical power of the Skyforge. These are the two pillars of Nordic tradition, the voice and the steel, the spirit and the sword. But while the Nords were busy organising their philosophies and building their cities, the dead were getting restless. You see, the ancient Nords had a very specific way of dealing with death, one that has created a massive headache for modern adventurers. We need to talk about the Draugr, not just as enemies you farm for gold, but as a cultural tragedy. Why are there so many of them? Why do they keep waking up? And what exactly are they waiting for? The transition from the Skyforge's ancient mystery to the rotting halls of the Barrows is a short walk. The Nords have always been obsessed with legacy, but in the ancient days, legacy meant preservation, and preservation, when mixed with dark magic, looks a lot like a curse. We left off contemplating the blue flames of the Skyforge, a relic that predates the very city it heats. But the Skyforge isn't just a cool blacksmithing station, it is a geological and metaphysical anomaly that screams alien artifact. Let's dig deeper into the secrets of the Skyforge. When the crew of the Jorvaskr, led by Jeek of the River, one of Ysgramor's captains, first stumbled upon the plain of Whiterun, they found it empty. No elven cities, no Dwemer ruins. Just the vast open tundra and this massive stone bird perched on the hill. The statue, if you can call it that, doesn't look like the Hawk of Kine. It looks predatory, sharp and distinctly wrong compared to other Nordic art. The crew of the Jorvaskr was so impressed they flipped their ship over and turned it into a mead hall right next to the forge. This is the core in-game fact. Whiterun was built around the Skyforge. The forge is the seed, the city is the moss that grew on it. But here is where it gets weird. The Skyforge has a unique relationship with the moons, Massa and Secunda. Yorland Greymane, the best blacksmith in Skyrim, Man Steel is legendary, as the guards won't stop reminding us, mentions that the forge is strongest at night. Why? Because the forge likely draws power from the lunar lattice. This connects it to Lorcan, the missing god, whose corpse supposedly forms the moons. There is a disturbing lore reference in the Song of the Return, Vol 7. It mentions that the elves feared the hill where the Skyforge stood. The Snow Elves, who built dazzling chantry temples in hidden valleys, completely avoided this prime real estate in the centre of the province. Why? Because to them it reeked of something ancient and hostile. Some scholars suggest the Skyforge was a site where the gods themselves forged the world during the Dawn era, or perhaps where Lorcan's heart was briefly placed before being shot into Red Mountain. And then there's the Skyforge steel. In the game, it's just steel with the stats of elven weaponry. But lore-wise, Skyforge steel is said to sing when swung. It holds an edge longer than any mundane metal, and is rumoured to be particularly effective against spirits and undead. It's as if the fire imbues the metal with a hatred for the unnatural. This brings us to a pervasive fan theory. The Skyforge is actually a dormant tower. In Elder Scrolls lore, towers, like the White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil or Red Mountain in Morrowind, are metaphysical spikes that hold reality together. If the Skyforge is a tower, or the stone of a fallen tower, it explains why Whiterun is the central trade hub and strategic key to Skyrim. Whoever controls Whiterun controls the centre of the province's stability, but the Skyforge has a darker side. We know about the Underforge, the secret chamber beneath it where the Circle performs the blood rituals of Hircine, but is it a coincidence that the werewolf rituals happen there? Or does the Skyforge amplify primal bestial nature? The beast blood seems to resonate with the ancient raw energy of the site. It's possible the companions didn't just choose a random cave. The Underforge might have been calling to the wildness in their blood long before they met the Glenmoril witches. The Skyforge remains one of the few things in Skyrim that the Nords use but do not fully understand. They maintain it, they respect it, but they don't know who built it. It's a permanent reminder that they are guests in a land that is much older than they are. Now let's descend from the open air of the Skyforge into the stagnant, suffocating darkness of the Nordic Barrows. We need to talk about the curse of the Draugr. We treat Draugr as cannon fodder. We fusrodar them, we chop them up, we loot 3 gold coins and a bone meal from their corpses. But have you ever stopped to think about the sheer scale of the Draugr population? There are thousands of them, in every barrow, in every tomb. Who were they? The common misconception is that Draugr are just cursed soldiers or generic zombies, but the truth is more tragic. During the height of the dragon cult, the Draugr were the followers. When a dragon priest died, his dedicated cultists were interred with him. But they weren't just killed and tossed in a pit. They were subjected to a ritual of eternal preservation. The Draugr are not dead in the traditional sense, they are suspended. Their life force is tied to the dragon priest they serve. Every night the Draugr wake up. They don't wander around aimlessly. They work. They clean the barrow. They light the candles, which is why the torches are always lit when you arrive, a detail that confuses many players. They pray at the altars, transferring their own meagre life force into the dragon priest to keep his soul tethered to Nirn. Then they return to their niches to sleep and recharge. It is a cycle of eternal servitude. They are batteries. This explains why they look so desiccated. They have been giving up their vitality for thousands of years. When you enter a barrow, you're breaking into a sealed ecosystem of magical energy transfer. The Draugr attack you not just because they are monsters, but because you are interrupting the ritual. You are a threat to the battery charging of their master. There is a particularly grim piece of lore found in the Book Amongst the Draugr by Bernadette Bantien. She spent months living in a barrow, using invisibility and stealth to observe them. She notes that after a group of adventurers killed some Draugr, the surviving Draugr didn't mourn. They simply dragged the bodies to the preparation table and attempted to repair them, or if they were too damaged, processed them into their component spirits. It's industrial, it's a factory of death. But not all Draugr were willing participants. The curse of the Draugr also extends to those who betrayed their oaths. The legend of Olaf One-Eye, which we will get to, involves him sealing his political enemies into the crypts alive. In this case, the Draugr curse is a punishment. To be denied the Hall of Valor in Sovngarde is the ultimate hell for a Nord. Sovngarde is the key here. Every Nord wants to go to Sovngarde. To become a Draugr is to be denied that release. It is a spiritual purgatory. Your soul is trapped in your rotting body, forced to defend a pile of ancient pottery and a dusty word wall forever. There is a fan theory that the Draugr retain some of their memories. When they shout at you, they use phrases like unkverto, unending, or danik ar, doomed one. They aren't just growling, they are speaking. Some players believe that deep down the Draugr want you to kill them. By destroying their physical form, you're finally breaking the binding ritual and allowing their souls to escape to the Aetherius or get recycled into the Dreamsleave. In this view, the Dragonborn is not a tomb robber, but a liberator, a mass exorcist. The presence of the Draugr also explains why modern Nords are so superstitious about ruins. Bleakfall's Barrow? No one goes there. It's not just because of the skeevers, it's because everyone knows that Uncle Hrothgar, who died 4,000 years ago, is still down there walking around. It's deeply unsettling to live in a country where your ancestors are physically present, but aggressively homicidal. The ancient Nords invested heavily in death. Their architecture, their magic, their economy. It was all focused on the Barrow. This obsession with the afterlife ironically made them masters of necromancy, a practice they now despise. The ancient Nordic set of armour isn't just heavy steel, it's ceremonial gear designed for the tomb, not the battlefield. So, the next time a Deathlord disarms you with a shout, remember, he's not just a monster. He's a victim of a theocratic regime that refused to let its subjects die. He is a testament to the dragon cult's terrifying efficiency. But before the dragon cult took over everything, and even existing alongside it, was the old ways, the worship of the animal totems. If you look at the puzzles in the ruins, snake, whale, eagle, you're looking at the remnants of this religion. It wasn't a puzzle to the ancient Nords, it was theology. The Atmorans didn't worship humans. They worshipped the forces of nature embodied as animals. We mentioned them briefly, but let's break down the big three that appear most often in the puzzles. The hawk, Kine. The sky, the storm, the breath. She is the watcher. She is usually placed high up in the puzzle hierarchy. The snake, Orki. The tester, the inevitable death, the cycle. Orki is often associated with Arkay or Malakath in later lore. The snake is tricky, grounded, bound to the earth. The whale, Stuan. The ransom god, the brother of Tsun. The whale represents strength, the ocean, and the bounty of the sea. Stuan taught the Nords the value of taking prisoners. Ransom, rather than just killing everyone, which was a significant cultural upgrade. Here is an in-game fact. You almost never see a dragon puzzle pillar. Why? Because the dragon wasn't a totem you played with. The dragon was the lock. The dragon claw keys are the only representation. You don't rotate a stone to find the dragon. You present the dragon to open the door. This symbolizes that the dragon is the gatekeeper of all knowledge and power. The transition from these totems to the imperial divines, Kine to Kinnereth, Stun to Stendar, Shor to Shezar, is a story of cultural colonization. When the Alessian Empire rose in the south, they tried to integrate the Nordic gods into their pantheon to keep the peace. The Nords, over thousands of years, slowly adopted the civilized names. But in the backcountry, in the hearts of the old clans, they still pray to the hawk, not Kinnereth. There is a lore text called the Dragon War, which suggests that the totem worship was actually a way to contain the dragon's influence. By elevating other animals, the bear, the fox, the Nords were trying to create a spiritual balance. The fox, Shor, is particularly important. Shor is the dead god, the trickster who fights for men. He is the mortal enemy of the elven gods. The fox totem is rarely seen in the game's puzzles, which is odd considering Shor is the chief deity of the Nordic pantheon. Some fan theories suggest that the fox was scrubbed from the temples by the dragon priest because Shor represented rebellion. Shor is the god who tricked the other spirits to create the world. The dragon priests, representing order and stasis, would hate the agent of chaos. The animal totems remind us that the Nordic religion is visceral. It's about blood, tooth and claw. It's not about sitting in a pew, it's about surviving the winter. When a Nord wears a bear pelt, he isn't just keeping warm, he is channeling the spirit of the bear totem. He's becoming the animal to survive the environment. This animistic worldview is why Nords are so connected to the land. They don't see the forest as a collection of trees. They see it as the domain of the hawk and the wolf. It's a living, breathing cathedral. But while the common folk worshipped the hawk and the whale, there were those who sought power beyond the totems. Those who looked at the cleverness of the elves and thought, I can do that better. This brings us to one of the most tragic figures in Nordic history, Azidal. Azidal's story is a tragedy of ambition and magic, but to understand the darkness he eventually tapped into, we must first understand the machinery of death he studied. Before a single enchanter could manipulate the energies of the grave, an entire civilization had to commit itself to the industry of dying. We have touched on the Draugr as the batteries of the dragon priests, but the rabbit hole of the curse of the Draugr goes much, much deeper than simple servitude. The Nordic barrow is not just a graveyard, it is a digestive system. Let's look at an in-game fact that often goes unnoticed because we're too busy dodging swinging axe traps. Have you ever looked at the tables in the depths of the barrows? The ones covered in linen wraps, embalming tools, and strange mummified remains? And have you noticed the embalming tools are valuable loot? The ancient Nords didn't just bury their dead, they processed them. The curse of the Draugr is rooted in the cult of the dragon, but specifically in the belief that the physical body is a vessel that must be maintained for the return of the dragons. When the Dragon War ended and the cult was driven underground, the priests knew they had to wait out the long millennia until Alduin's return. But a mortal body rots. Even a powerful mage eventually withers. So, they developed the lichdom of the dragon priests. This wasn't the standard necromancy of the Manimarco variety, where you just animate a corpse. This was a sophisticated, magically sustained stasis. The dragon priests, Morake, Hevnarak, Nakrin and the others, bound their souls to their physical masks and their withered bodies. But to keep those bodies from turning to dust, they needed a constant influx of life energy. Enter the Draugr. The Draugr are the restless ones. In the ancient tongue, they are the Hugboi, the mound dwellers. The tragedy is that many of these Draugr were not slaves. They were the faithful. They were the true believers who volunteered to be buried alive with their masters. Imagine the fanaticism required. You are a warrior of the dragon cult. Your high priest is dying, or entering his eternal sleep. You're told that the greatest honor you can achieve is to guard him while he sleeps. You drink the ritual poisons. You lie down in the sarcophagus, and you wait for the darkness to take you, believing you will wake up in a glorious new world when the World Eater returns. Instead, you wake up a shriveled husk, enslaved to a hunger you can't understand. There is a disturbing lore implication regarding the cannibalism of the Draugr. The book amongst the Draugr mentions that Draugr maintain the barrow, but it also hints at where the energy comes from. Some lore theorists suggest that in the early days of the barrows, fresh sacrifices were thrown in. The Draugr would process these sacrifices to feed the priest. As the centuries wore on and the sacrifices stopped, the Draugr began to cannibalize each other or simply cycle the same stale energy back and forth in a closed loop of misery. This closed loop is why the barrows feel so heavy. The air is thick with recycled souls. When you kill a Draugr and absorb its soul, if you're using a soul gem, you're often trapping a soul that has been trapped for 4,000 years. We also need to talk about the hierarchy. The Draugr are not all equal. You have the lowly thralls, the restless Draugr, the wights, the scourges, and the death lords. This mirrors the strict caste system of Atmoran society. The death lords were the generals, the thanes of the dragon priests. They wield the ebony weapons. Ebony is another key piece of the puzzle. Ebony is the blood of Lorcan, the missing god. It is a volcanic glass that is literally the crystallized blood of a deity. The ancient Nords knew this. They buried their greatest warriors with ebony weapons, not just because they were sharp, but because ebony has a magical resonance. It conducts the voice. When a Death Lord shouts at you, his ebony sword is resonating with that tonal frequency. The weapon and the wielder are tuned to the same violent key. And what of the fan theory that the Draugr are actually protecting the world? It sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. We assume the Draugr are guarding the priests to help them conquer the world. But what if the Draugr were bound there to keep the priests in? After the Dragon War, the surviving Nords couldn't kill the priests, who were too powerful, so they built these massive barrows as prisons. The Draugr were the jailers, bound by oaths to ensure the priests never woke up. Over time, the magic corrupted them, and they forgot their mission, becoming hostile to everyone. This theory gains traction when you look at Hevnorak's barrow, Valtum. The ghost of Valdar is there, explicitly keeping Hevnorak sealed. Valdar is a Draugr-like spirit who is good. He asked for your help to stop the priest from waking up. This implies that at least some of the barrows were designed as containment facilities, not palaces. The curse might originally have been a duty. This duality, duty versus curse, is the central tragedy of the Nord dead. They are a people who value freedom above all else, yet their ancestors are the most enslaved beings on Nirn. Let's focus on the architecture of the curse for a moment. The puzzle doors. We touched on the totems earlier, but look at the mechanism. The diamond claw, the golden claw, the coral claw. These keys are made of precious materials, often seemingly out of place in a stone tomb. They are masterworks of art. Why? Because the dragon priests were hoarders. They were dragons in human skin possessing the same lust for wealth. The barrows are their hoards. The Draugr are the biological traps guarding the gold. But the most insidious part of the curse is the word walls. Every major barrow has one, a wall etched with the dragon language, glowing with power. These walls are historical records, often commemorating a great dragon or a battle. But why are they in the tombs? Because the dragon priests wanted to own history. They buried the truth with them. By hoarding the words of power, they ensured that the common folk would forget the voice. The Draugr guard the words not just to keep you from learning them, but to keep the concepts of those words dead. If no one remembers the word for kind's peace, then peace ceases to exist as a powerful concept in the world. The barrows are censorship made of stone. One specific barrow illustrates the horror of the curse better than any other: Forelhost. This is the siege of the dragon cult. It sits on a peak in the rift. Inside, you find the remnants of the very last stand of the dragon cult. The lore here is brutal. The cultists, besieged by the armies of King Harald, committed mass suicide rather than surrender. They poisoned their own children. You find the small Draugr bodies wrapped in rags. You find the poisoned bloom flowers growing from the corpses. In Forelhost, the air is toxic. The curse here is palpable. It isn't just magic, it's the psychic residue of a mass fanatic suicide. The Draugr here are aggressive, desperate. They are the ghosts of a people who chose death over a world without their dragon gods. It is a chilling reminder that the Nords are capable of intense self-destructive devotion. The curse of the Draugr also explains the sleeping tree sap and other strange substances found in Skyrim. The roots of the Nirnroot and the ancient trees often penetrate into the barrows. They feed on the magical runoff of the embalming fluids. The land of Skyrim itself is marinated in the necromantic energies of the dragon cult. When you drink a potion made from Skyrim's herbs, you are drinking a little bit of history and a little bit of dead Nord. So the next time you sneak through a barrow and hear that dry, rasping breath of a Draugr waking up, remember, he isn't just an enemy. He is a time capsule. He is a preserved slice of the Merethic era, held together by hate, duty, and the refusal to let go. While the Draugr slumber in the dark, guarding the rotting legacy of the dragon priests, we must turn our eyes back to the light. Or rather, to the gods who lived in the wind and the forest before the stone temples of the Empire were ever built. We've mentioned the animal totems in passing, but to understand the soul of the Nord, we have to strip away the divines and look at the raw, animistic truth of the animal totems. The modern Nord goes to the Temple of Kinnereth or prays to Stendarr, but the Atmoran didn't have temples. They had the woods. They didn't have human-shaped gods in togas. They had the beasts. The transition from animal totems to the imperial pantheon is one of the great cultural erasures in Tamrielic history. It was a slow, deliberate rebranding campaign by the Alessian Order and later the Septim Empire to make the terrifying Nordic gods safe for general consumption. Let's start with the big one, the Hawk. We know her as Kine. The Imperials call her Kinnereth. They say they are the same god. They are lying. Kinnereth is a benevolent goddess of nature, the wind that rustles the leaves, the patron of travellers. She's gentle. Kine is the storm. She's the widow of Shor. She's the mother of men who looked at the trembling refugees of Atmora and said, "Fight." She is the kiss at the end, the goddess who guides the souls of the dead to Sovngarde. Kine is bloody. Kine is fierce. When a Nord prays to Kine, he isn't asking for a nice breeze. He's asking for the strength to kill his enemies. The Hawk totem represents this predatory, soaring oversight. She sees all, she strikes fast, and she is the apex of the sky. Below the dragon, of course. Then there is the snake. In the modern pantheon, this is often associated with Arkay, the god of life and death. But the Atmoran snake, Orki, is far more sinister. Orki is the primal tester. In Nordic myths, Orki is the one who stole the Nords' long lifespans, cursing them to die young. He is a trickster, a binder, a god of the earth and the grave. The snake totem is found in the deepest parts of the barrows because he governs the transition from life to death. He isn't a benevolent undertaker. He is the cold inevitability of mortality. He is the reason Nords fight so hard, because they know the snake is waiting, and he has no mercy. And the fox. This is the most subversive totem. The fox is Shor. To the elves, he is Lorcan, the trickster, the doomdrum, the devil who tricked the Aedra into creating the mortal plane and losing their divinity. To the Nords, he is the hero. He is the fox because he is clever, elusive, and constantly hunted. Here is a core in-game fact. You will almost never see a statue of Shor in Skyrim. You see statues of Talos, but not Shor. Why? Because Shor is dead. His heart was ripped out, but his spirit, the fox, remains. He is the god of the underdog. He is the champion of mankind against the elven gods. The Imperials try to equate him with Shezar, but they downplay his war against the elves. The Nords know better. When they shout Shor's bones, they are swearing by the corpse of their creator. The bear is Tsun, the shield thane of Shor. We meet him in Sovngarde. He is the god of trials against adversity. The bear is stoic, strong, and protective. Stendarr is the watered-down version, the god of mercy. Tsun has no mercy, he has honour. There is a difference. Tsun won't forgive you, he will test you to see if you can take the hit. The wolf is Mara, the she-wolf, the mother. But again, the Imperial Mara is a goddess of love and marriage. The Atmoran wolf Mara is the fierce protector of the pack. She is the mother who will tear the throat out of anyone who threatens her cubs. It's a love born of survival, not romance. The moth is Julianos, the god of logic and magic. But the moth implies something fluttering, something drawn to the light of truth but easily burned. It represents the fragility of wisdom. Why does this distinction matter? Because it explains the schism in Skyrim today. The old holds, Winterhold, the Pale, the Rift, Eastmarch, still hold to the spirit of the totems. They respect the wild. The new holds, Harfingar, Hjalmarch, Folkreath, have been culturally colonised by the Empire. They build stone churches and pray to human statues. The Civil War isn't just about Talos, it's about a fundamental clash of theology. Talos himself is a bridge. He is a dragon-born god, a human who ascended. He fits into the Nordic worldview because he is a conqueror, like the dragon, and a man, like Shor. He effectively replaced Shor as the head of the pantheon for the modern Nord. This is why the ban on Talos hits so hard. It removes the one god who actually feels Nordic. There is a fascinating fan theory regarding the Kalpic cycle and the totems. The theory suggests that the totems represent the roles played in the cosmic drama of the end times. The dragon, Alduin, eats the world. The fox, Shor, tries to stop him or hide pieces of the world to carry over to the next. The hawk, Kine, preserves the spirits. The snake, Orki, ensures the dead stay dead. It's a cosmic play that repeats every era. The Nords, by worshipping these totems, are rehearsing their parts for the apocalypse. We also need to mention the owl, Junal. He is the god of runes and hermetic knowledge. He has almost completely vanished from modern Skyrim, likely because the Nords started hating magic. Junal became too elven for them. He was the god of logic, and let's be honest, logic hasn't been a strong suit of Nordic culture since the First Era. His disappearance from the Pantheon tracks perfectly with the Nords' cultural shift from clever men to magic-hating warriors. The tension between the animal totems and the divines is nowhere more evident than in the Froki's Shack questline. Froki Wetted Blade is an old hunter who gives you the kind sacred trials. He calls the divines imperial impostors. He sends you to hunt the guardian spirits, ghostly crabs, wolves and bears. When you do this, you're participating in the oldest religion in human history. You aren't praying, you are hunting. You're proving your place in the food chain. This is the essence of Atmoran faith, worship through action. This animism also explains the Nords' relationship with lycanthropy. While Hircine is a Daedric prince and technically evil to the establishment, many Nords view the wolf blood as a return to the primal state. The companions don't see themselves as cursed. Well, some do, like Kodlak, but many see it as a blessing of the wolf totem, even if it's technically Hircine. The lines blur in the wild. The erasure of the animal totems is a tragedy because it disconnected the Nords from their environment. When you worship the hawk, you respect the sky. When you worship Kinnereth, the human lady, you build a roof to keep the sky out. The Nords lost their wildness. They became civilized. And in the world of Elder Scrolls, civilization is often just a slow decline into weakness. But there was one Nord who never accepted limits. One man who looked at the totems, looked at the dragon priests, looked at the elves, and said, "I will learn it all." He was the bridge between the old magic and the new madness. He was the greatest enchanter humanity ever produced, and his descent into darkness serves as the ultimate cautionary tale for those who seek to know too much. It is time to talk about Azidal. The story of Azidal is the story of the kid who was too smart for his own good, and definitely too smart for the good of everyone else. If Isgramor was the brawn of the return, Azidal was the terrifyingly overqualified brain. His name means the embittered destroyer in the dragon language, but he wasn't born with that name. He was born a clever boy in the city of Sarthal, back when it was just a chilly frontier town and not a smoking crater. He had a gift for magic, a natural aptitude that made the local village elders nervous. While other kids were learning how to skin hawkers, Azidal was trying to figure out how to make fire burn underwater. When the Night of Tears happened, that horrific elven raid we discussed back in Section 2, Azidal wasn't there. He was away, studying. This is the pivotal moment of his life. He came home to find his city burned, his family slaughtered, and his people scattered. Most Nords would have picked up an axe and sworn a blood oath of vengeance. Azidal did swear vengeance, but he knew that an axe wasn't enough. He looked at the Snow Elves, with their shimmering magic and their mastery of the arcane, and realised that to beat them, he had to become them. He had to understand the very weapon that had destroyed his home. So he did the unthinkable. He went to live with the elves. This is a piece of lore that paints a picture of a man driven by a cold, calculating obsession. Azidal travelled across Tamriel. He studied with the Snow Elves, hiding his true nature or perhaps trading service for knowledge. He learned their alteration and restoration magics. Then he went to the Dwemer, the dwarves. He learned their tonal architecture and the secrets of metal. He travelled to the Aelids in the south and the Chimer in the east. He learned the destructive magic of the Daedra worshippers. He became the first human polymath. He was a sponge for forbidden knowledge. Imagine the sheer willpower required to sit at the feet of the very races that murdered your family, smiling, nodding, and taking notes, all while planning to use that knowledge to wipe them off the face of the map. It's the long con to end all long cons. When he finally returned to Skyrim, Ysgramor and the 500 companions had just landed. They were mighty warriors, yes, but they were fighting an enemy that used high-level magic. They needed an edge. Azidal walked into their camp and offered them that edge. He enchanted their weapons. Here is a core in-game fact. If you play the Dragonborn DLC and undertake the Unearthed quest, you recover the artifacts of Ahzidal. His armor set is unique. The boots allow you to walk on water, the gauntlets allow you to absorb magicka, the rings grant you new spells. These aren't just random loot, they are the prototypes of Nordic enchanting. But more importantly, lore states that he enchanted the Wuthrad-style axes of the companions. The reason the 500 could cut through elven armor like butter wasn't just Nordic strength. It was because Azidal had imbued their steel with the very elven magic designed to destroy it. He turned their own science against them. For a while, Azidal was a hero. He was the clever man who made the return possible. But here is where the tragedy sets in. You don't just learn Dwemer tonal architecture and Ayleid blood magic without it changing you. You don't stare into the abyss that long without the abyss deciding to move into your spare bedroom. Azidal had fulfilled his vengeance. The snow elves were broken. But he couldn't stop. The hunger for knowledge had replaced the hunger for revenge. He had become addicted to mastery. He felt that the Nords were too primitive, too satisfied with simple conquest. He wanted more. He eventually found his way to the dragon cult. At this point, the cult was the only organization that offered the kind of power he craved. The dragon priests were the scholars, the rulers, the ones who spoke to gods. Azidal, the great hero of humanity, defected. He became an acolyte priest. This is a massive fall from grace. It's like the scientist who invented the vaccine suddenly deciding to work for the virus. He travelled to Solstheim, to the Temple of Miraak, though Miraak's timeline is its own mess, and eventually settled in Kolbjorn Barrow. But the dragon cult didn't just want his enchanting skills, they wanted his mind. Azidal began to experiment with magic that shouldn't exist. He delved into the secrets of the Daedra, specifically Hermaeus Mora, the Gardener of Men. It is widely believed that Azidal's descent into madness was facilitated by the temptations of the Black Books. There is a fan theory that Azidal is actually the most powerful mortal mage in history, surpassing even Shalidor. Shalidor was great, but he was a traditionalist. Azidal broke every rule. He combined elven, dwarven, and human magic into a synthetic whole. The theory suggests that the only reason he didn't conquer Tamriel himself is that he simply lost interest in the physical world. He became obsessed with the next layer of reality, eventually driving himself insane. His end was not glorious. He didn't die in battle. He retreated into Kolbjorn Barrow on Solstheim and essentially walled himself in. He intended to wait. To wait for what? Perhaps for a time when the world was ready for his genius, or perhaps he was just hiding from the monsters he had created in his own head. In the Fourth Era, during the events of Skyrim, we meet Rallis Sedaris, a Dunmer treasure hunter who's excavating Kolbjorn Barrow. This quest, Unearthed, is one of the most memorable, because it unfolds over time. You fund the dig, you leave, you get a letter. Come back, something went wrong. You go back, the Draugr have killed the miners, you clear them out, you fund more digging, repeat. It becomes clear that Azidal is influencing Rallis. He is whispering to him, driving him mad, demanding sacrifices. Rallis starts killing. The miners himself to feed Azidal's soul. It's a chilling callback to the ancient dragon cult rituals. Azidal is trying to resurrect himself, not as a lich, but as a god. When you finally confront Azidal, he is a terrifying opponent. He uses fire magic that hits like a freight train. He is a dragon priest, but he fights like a battle mage. He is the culmination of everything he learned. The aggression of the Nord, the finesse of the elf, the power of the dragon. But look at his face. Or rather his mask. The mask, Azidal, gives you 50% resistance to fire and increases your fire damage. It's a mask of burning. It reflects his life. He was consumed by his own flame. The boy who wanted to master fire ended up being burned alive by it, metaphorically and spiritually. The tragedy of Azidal is the tragedy of the Nords' relationship with magic. He represents the road not taken. If the Nords had embraced Azidal's path, the path of magical supremacy, they might have become the dominant magical power in Tamriel. Imagine a Skyrim where every soldier could walk on water and shoot fireballs. The Falmer wouldn't stand a chance, but the Nords looked at Azidal, at his madness, his betrayal, his corruption, and they said, no. They saw what magic did to their greatest genius, and they rejected it. Azidal is the reason the Nords hate magic. He is the proof that clever men eventually become monsters. His legacy is hidden in the enchantments of Skyrim. Every time you use an enchanting table, you're using the techniques Azidal pioneered. He standardized the process. He created the bridge between the soul gem and the object. He is the father of Nordic enchanting, but his children have disowned him. One specific item of his, Azidal's Ring of Arcana, grants you the spells Ignite and Freeze. These spells are unique. They don't appear anywhere else. They suggest that Azidal had begun to invent his own school of destruction magic, something more efficient and deadly than standard spells. Ignite stacks damage over time. It's a cruel spell. It burns you slowly. It's a reflection of his own bitterness. The location of his barrow on Solstheim is also significant. Solstheim is a borderland, a mix of Nord and Dunmer culture. It's fitting that Azidal, the man who tried to blend the two worlds, ended up buried there. He belongs to neither Skyrim nor Morrowind. He is an outcast in death as he was in life. Azidal serves as a dark mirror to Ysgramor. Ysgramor is the hero who used an axe to save his people. Azidal is the hero who used his mind to save his people, and was damned for it. It asks the uncomfortable question, is there such a thing as bad knowledge? To the Nords, the answer is a resounding yes. As we leave the ash-covered ruins of Kolbjorn Barrow, leaving the embittered destroyer to finally rot in peace, we must look at the political fallout of the era he lived in. The dragon cult eventually fell, yes. The Nords rejected the magic of Azidal, but the first empire of the Nords didn't collapse just because of external enemies. It collapsed because of internal rot. It collapsed because of a king who hunted the wrong prey. We are moving from the tragedy of a single mage to the tragedy of an entire dynasty. We're going to talk about the Wild Hunt. We're going to talk about the man who killed the Nord Empire because he couldn't leave the elves alone. Enter King Borgas, the last of the Ysgramor line, and the man who found out exactly what happens when you push the Wood Elves too far. The tragedy of Azidal taught us that individual brilliance can be a curse, but the story of High King Borgas teaches us that bad politics can be an extinction event. We are fast-forwarding a bit here, past the immediate aftermath of the Dragon War, to the year 1E 369. The first empire of the Nords is teetering on the edge of its own greatness. It spans much of northern Tamriel, but cracks are showing. And sitting on the throne in Winterhold is King Borgas. Borgas has the distinction of being the last living descendant of Ysgramor. That's a heavy resume. You have the blood of the returning hero in your veins. You're the literal culmination of the Atmoran legacy. You'd think he would be the most Nordic Nord to ever Nord. But Borgas was complicated. He wasn't content with just the traditional Nordic pantheon. He looked south, to the rising power of the Alessian order in Cyrodiil. The Alessians were a fanatical monotheistic sect that hated elves with a burning passion, something Borgas could get behind, but they also had strict puritanical rules that didn't exactly mesh with the mead-swilling culture of Skyrim. Yet, Borgas saw them as useful allies. He wanted to strengthen the Empire by aligning with the South against the Elven threat. Specifically, he wanted to wipe out the Wood Elves of Valenwood. Now why Volenwood? It's on the other side of the continent. It seems like a strange target for a king of Skyrim. But the Alessian Order claimed the Bosmer were harbouring Ayleid refugees, the Heartland High Elves who had enslaved the humans of Cyrodiil. Borgas, eager to prove his piety to his new southern friends and perhaps indulge in the family tradition of elf hunting, decided to march south. He travelled to Cyrodiil to join a joint task force for what was supposed to be a righteous crusade. He expected a standard military campaign, shield walls, sieges, some burning villages, standard Tuesday stuff. He clearly hadn't read the brochures on the Green Pact. The Bosmer, the Wood Elves, are generally seen as the nice elves. They are short, they live in trees, they are great archers, but they have a nuclear option, a spiritual panic button given to them by their patron god, Y'ffre. It is called the Wild Hunt. When the Bosmer are threatened with extinction, when the walls are closing in and there is no escape, they can perform a ritual that breaks the laws of shape. They renounce their form. They reject the stability of the physical world and return to the chaos of the Dawn era. This brings us to a piece of lore that is frankly nauseating. The Pocket Guide to the Empire describes the Wild Hunt not as an army, but as a frothing tide, The elves physically mutate. Their bones snap and reform. They turn into beasts, tentacles, clouds of teeth and slime. They become a horde of shifting, cannibalistic monsters that consume everything in their path, including each other when the enemies are gone. It is total, weaponized, biological collapse. Borgas and his elite guard, presumably some of the finest warriors Skyrim had to offer, were confident. They crossed the border into Valenwood, and then the forest itself seemed to scream. The wild hunt descended on them. This wasn't a battle. You can't parry a wave of flesh that is constantly changing shape. You can't shield bash a creature that has 12 mouths and no torso. Borgas, the heir of Ysgramor, the king of Winterhold, the most powerful man in the north, was torn apart, and not just killed, eaten, consumed, erased. The wild hunt doesn't leave bodies for burial, it leaves nothing. This event is the reason you don't see Nords messing with Valenwood anymore. The trauma of that massacre, the sheer horror of how their king died, sent a shockwave through Skyrim that shattered the First Empire instantly. With Borgas dead, the line of Ysgramor ended. There was no heir, no clear successor. The Moot, the council of Jarls that convenes to choose a high king, met to decide who would rule, and predictably they couldn't agree. This kicked off the War of Succession, a brutal civil war that lasted for 50 years. 50 years of brother killing brother. The Empire lost its holdings in High Rock and Morrowind because the Nords were too busy killing each other to defend their borders. The First Empire of the Nords, which had stood for centuries, evaporated because one king decided to poke the hornet's nest in Valenwood. This era gives us an in-game fact that is central to the Civil War questline in Skyrim. The Jagged Crown. You recover this crown for either Ulfric Stormcloak or General Tullius. It is said to be the ancient symbol of the High King's power. Galmar's stone fist tells you it is made from the bones and teeth of ancient dragons. Though it looks more like jagged metal, the teeth motif is clear. Legend says it contains the might of every king who wore it. But here is the kicker. The jagged crown was lost during the War of Succession. It was likely the crown Borgas was wearing, or one of the claimants immediately after him. When you find it in Corvin Jund, you are finding the relic that represents the moment Skyrim broke. It was buried with a Draugr who is presumably a king from that chaotic period, someone who claimed the throne but couldn't hold the kingdom together. Placing that crown on Ulfric or Elisif isn't just a coronation, it's an attempt to heal a wound that has been open since 1E369. It is an attempt to undo the damage Borgas did. There is a fascinating fan theory regarding Borgas' death and the Alessian Order. Some believe the Alessians wanted Borgas to die. They knew about the Wild Hunt. They knew what happens when you invade Valenwood. The theory posits that the Alessian priesthood saw the Ysgramor bloodline as a threat to their theological dominance. The Nords were stubborn. They wouldn't fully convert to the one god, as long as the heir of Ysgramor sat on the throne. By sending Borgas into a meat grinder, they removed the obstacle. It was an assassination by proxy. This betrayal would explain why the Nords eventually turned on the Alessian Order with such ferocity later on. Wulfharth, the Ash King, another legendary figure we'll touch on, made it his mission to purge the Alessian influence from Skyrim. The Nords realised they had been played. The death of Borgas also shifted the balance of power within Skyrim itself. Before this, Winterhold was the capital. It was the seat of power. After the War of Succession, the power centre began to drift. Windhelm and Solitude rose as the primary contenders. The rivalry you see in the game today, East versus West, Windhelm versus Solitude, is the direct result of the vacuum left by Borgas. The East, Old Holds, supported the traditional Nordic claimants. The West, more influenced by their neighbours and trade, supported more progressive or imperialised Ars candidates. The civil war in Skyrim is just the latest flare-up of a fire that was lit the day Borgas got eaten. But let's circle back to the Wild Hunt for a second because it recontextualises the Bosmer you meet in the game. Fendel in Riverwood, nice guy, teaches you archery. But deep in his DNA, he carries the potential to become a shape-shifting horror. The Green Pact isn't just a quirky religious diet. Don't harm plants, eat only meat. It is a containment treaty. The Pact is the only thing keeping the Bosmer from reverting to the ooze. This adds a layer of tension to any interaction with Wood Elves. They are walking biological weapons who have signed a non-proliferation treaty with their own god. The Nords know this. That's why there's a specific kind of wariness. It's not just racism, It's the ancestral memory of the time their greatest king was turned into luncheon meat by a sentient forest. The fall of the Isgramor dynasty also marked the end of the mythic age of Nordic heroes. After Borgas, the kings became more political, more mortal. We stopped seeing guys who could shout mountains apart or enchant boots to walk on water. We started seeing bureaucrats and warlords. The magic was draining out of the world. However, one legend from this post-Borgas era stands out. It's a story of a king who tried to recapture the old glory, not by fighting elves, but by fighting a dragon. And this story involves a bard, a burning festival, and a lie that has lasted for thousands of years. We need to travel to Solitude, to the Blue Palace, and to the barrow that sits high in the mountains above Morthal. We need to talk about Olaf One-Eye. You've seen the festival, you've seen the effigy burning. But do you know why they burn him? The history books say he was a hero who captured the dragon Numinex. The bards say he was a fraud. And the truth? The truth is locked in a coffin with a Draugr who is very, very angry about his bad press. In the wake of King Borgas' disastrous Valenwood buffet, Skyrim was a mess. The War of Succession had turned the province into a patchwork of feuding holds, each Jarl claiming to be the rightful High King. The Nords needed a hero. They needed someone who could do the impossible and remind them of the glory days of the Dragon War. They needed a symbol. Enter Olaf One-Eye. Olaf was a Jarl of Whiterun, a warlord with, as the name suggests, one eye and a whole lot of ambition. He saw the chaos and realised that he couldn't just conquer his way to the throne, he had to inspire his way there. He needed a feat so undeniably legendary that the other Jarls would have no choice but to bend the knee. And what is the ultimate Nordic status symbol? A dragon. At this point in history, dragons were rare. The Dragon War was ancient history. Most dragons were dead or in deep hiding. But one, a particularly nasty beast named Numinex, was terrorising the countryside around Mount Anthor. He was burning villages, eating livestock, and generally making a nuisance of himself. Olaf saw an opportunity. He marched up Mount Anthor with his troops. According to the official story, the one taught in schools and sung by bards who like keeping their heads attached to their necks, Olaf faced Numinex alone. He engaged the dragon in a shout duel. Their voices clashed, shattering the rocks and shaking the mountain to its roots. Eventually, Olaf, through sheer force of will and the power of his Thuum, subdued the dragon. But he didn't kill it. Killing it would have been easy. Well, relatively. Olaf did something crazier. He captured it. He dragged Numinex all the way from Mount Anthor to Whiterun. Let's pause and consider the logistics of this. We're talking about a creature the size of a bus, which breathes fire and hates you. Olaf presumably bound its wings and muzzle, perhaps using the ancient chains of the dragon cult, and hauled it miles across the tundra. When he arrived in Whiterun, he didn't just put the dragon in a cage, he renovated his castle. He built a massive porch, a dragon's reach, specifically to house his prisoner. This is in-game fact that is impossible to miss. The Jarl's Palace in Whiterun is called Dragon's Reach for this exact reason. And hanging above the Jarl's throne is the massive bleached skull of Numinex. That skull is real. You can climb up and stand on it if you're disrespectful enough. It is the physical proof that Olaf did in fact catch a dragon. The stunt worked. The sheer audacity of keeping a pet dragon awed the other Jarls. The moot convened, and Olaf One-Eye was named High King of Skyrim. He had reunited the province. He was the saviour. Or was he? Enter Svaknir. Svaknir was a bard. And not just any bard. He was the investigative journalist of his day. While everyone else was drinking Olaf's Kool-Aid, or mead, Svaknir was asking questions. He started digging into the details of the Battle of Mount Anthor. He interviewed the soldiers, he looked at the timeline, and he came to a conclusion that was explosive. Svaknir wrote a verse, King Olaf's verse. In this poem, Svaknir alleged that Olaf was a fraud. He claimed that there was no epic duel. He insinuated that Olaf might have struck a deal with Numinex, or perhaps found the dragon already weakened, or used some form of trickery that violated the Nordic code of honour. He painted Olaf not as a hero, but as a tyrant who used a prop to seize power. Olaf, proving that he wasn't exactly a champion of free speech, did not take this criticism well. He had Svaknir arrested. He destroyed every copy of the verse he could find, and then, in a fit of rage, He had Svagnir executed and his body sealed in the crypt of Dead Men's Respite. But Olaf went a step further. He was buried in the same crypt. This is deeply petty. Olaf wanted to be the jailer of Svagnir's soul for eternity. He wanted to make sure that the bard could never tell his story, even in the afterlife. In the Bard's College questline, Tending the Flames, you enter Dead Men's Respite. You see the ghost of Svagnir. He's still there, clutching his drum, waiting for someone to hear the truth. He guides you through the dungeon, helping you fight the Draugr. When you finally reach the burial chamber, you find the verse. It's illegible to the untrained eye, but the Bard's College can decipher it. So what did the verse actually say? The recovered text is a scathing diss track. It calls Olaf a lying scoundrel and a false king. It claims Numenex was old and weak, and that Olaf merely promised him safety in exchange for surrender. This leads to a fascinating fan theory. Did Olaf actually make a deal with the dragon? Think about it. Numenex was being hunted. He was likely the last of his kind in the area. Maybe he was tired. Maybe Olaf offered him a steady supply of sheep and a warm place to sleep in Dragon's Reach, in exchange for playing along with the captured monster charade. It would be the ultimate political theatre. A dragon gets retirement, a jarl gets a kingdom. The game doesn't give us a definitive answer, but the battle with Olaf's Draugr suggests he was no pushover. He's a tough boss. He shouts. He wields a massive weapon. He doesn't fight like a coward. But here is the twist that messes with everyone's heads. You meet Olaf One-Eye in Sovngarde. When you go to the Hall of Valor at the end of the main quest, Olaf is there. He's sitting at the table, drinking mead, boasting with the other heroes. This is a massive piece of lore implication. To get into Sovngarde, you have to die valiantly. Zun tests you. Shor invites you. If Olaf was a complete fraud and a liar, would he be in Sovngarde? Probably not. This suggests that while Svagnir's verse might have had grains of truth, maybe Olaf exaggerated, Olaf was still a mighty warrior worthy of the hall. Or perhaps, in the eyes of the Nordic gods, might makes right. Even if he tricked the dragon, the fact that he pulled it off and unified Skyrim was heroic enough for sure. The gods of the Nords aren't obsessed with objective truth. They're obsessed with strength and results. Olaf got results. However, the Bard's College in Solitude doesn't care about Sovngarde's guest list. They care about the story. Every year they hold the Burning of King Olaf festival. They build a straw effigy of Olaf, looking very much like a piñata, and burn it in the streets while reciting Svagnir's condemned verse. It is a celebration of rebellion. It is a reminder that you can kill the bard, but you can't kill the song. The Nords of Solitude, the capital of the Empire in Skyrim, love this festival. It's ironic, really. They are celebrating the defamation of a high king who unified Skyrim, effectively cheering for the first recorded instance of fake news, or whistleblowing, depending on your perspective. The festival itself is a wonderful bit of world building. It shows that Nordic culture isn't monolithic. You have the warriors who revere Olaf as a god hero, and you have the bards and intellectuals who see him as a symbol of tyranny. But let's look closer at Numenex. What happened to him? He lived in Dragon's Reach for years. Parthenax mentions that he visited him once. Imagine that conversation, the ancient wise Parthenax visiting his imprisoned brother in the wooden palace of a human king. Numenex eventually died in captivity, his mind shattered by the confinement. Dragons are creatures of the sky. To box them in is to kill their soul. Some say Numenex's spirit still haunts Dragon's Reach. There are rumours among the guards of strange noises in the Great Porch at night, a low growling that vibrates through the floorboards. Olaf's deception, whether real or imagined, teaches us about the power of narrative. Olaf knew that to rule Skyrim, you need a story. He gave them a story of a dragon slayer. Svagnir tried to give them a story of a liar. Olaf won the battle of his lifetime, but Svagnir is winning the war of memory every year in Solitude. The story of Olaf also highlights the shift in the role of the voice. Olaf was a tongue. He used the voice to capture Numenex, but after him, the use of the voice by high kings began to decline. The Greybeards were gaining influence. The way of the voice was taking root. Olaf was perhaps the last of the old-school kings who used the shout as a primary tool of governance. After Olaf, the high kings relied more on political alliances and conventional armies. The dragon part of the monarchy became symbolic. The skull of Numenex became just a decoration, a dusty relic that Jarl Balgruf's kids play hide-and-seek around, unaware that it once belonged to a creature that could melt stone. But while Olaf was busy dragging dragons and silencing bards, deep in the frozen forests, a different kind of horror was brewing. A horror that didn't care about politics or kings. The Nords have many ghost stories. They tell tales of the ice wraiths and the trolls. But there is one legend that makes even the bravest shield maiden check the lock on her door. It is the legend of the Pale Lady. We are leaving the halls of kings and entering the misty, cursed wetlands of Jarlmarch. We are going to explore the folklore of the Wisp Mothers. Who are they? Are they ghosts? Are they elves? Or are they something much older and much sadder? The connection between the Wisp Mothers and the ancient snow elves is a thread that unravels a history of stolen children and a mother's vengeance that refuses to die. We step away from the roaring fires of the mead halls and the shouting matches of kings to walk into the mist. If you travel through the pale or the swampy lowlands of Jarlmarch at night, you might see lights dancing over the marshes. Not the warm glow of a lantern, but a cold, pale luminescence. These are the wisps, and where there are wisps, the mother is close behind. The Wisp Mother is perhaps the most unsettling entity in Skyrim. She isn't a Draugr, shuffling and groaning. She isn't a vampire driven by a thirst for blood. She's something ethereal, elegant, and terrifyingly silent. She hovers above the ground, ragged robes drifting in a wind that no one else feels, surrounded by a court of glowing souls. But what is she? Nordic folklore is full of warnings about the Pale Ladies. Mothers tell their children not to follow the lights in the fog. They say the Wisp Mothers steal children to replace the ones they lost. It's a classic boogeyman story, but in Tamriel the boogeyman usually drops loot. Let's look at an in-game fact that anchors this legend. The quest, the Pale Lady, in Frostmere Crypt. Here, you find a group of bandits who have been driven mad. One of them stole a sword, the Pale Blade, and in doing so broke the seal on an ancient crypt. The Pale Lady is a named Wisp Mother who has been trapped there for generations. The bandit leader, Rajir, is incoherent, babbling about returning the sword to appease her. When you finally encounter her, she is guarding the blade. This suggests a high level of intelligence and attachment. She isn't a mindless beast, she is a guardian. The Pale Blade itself is enchanted with frost and fear. Creatures and people up to level 16 flee from combat for 30 seconds. It inflicts terror. It is a weapon of psychological warfare. But the real secret of the Wisp Mothers lies in their origin. They are almost certainly not human. Look at their ears. They are pointed. Look at their height. They are tall and slender. Look at their magic. They use frost. They summon shades, clones of themselves, and they can resurrect the dead to fight for them. This points to a disturbing lore connection. The Wisp Mothers may be the last vestiges of the ancient Snow Elf priestesses. Before the Nords arrived, the Snow Elves ruled Skyrim. They were a sophisticated, magical race. When the Atmorans committed the genocide and the Dwemer betrayed the refugees, where did the Snow Elf women go? The powerful matriarchs, the high priestesses of the Chantry. It is believed that some of them refused to take the Dwemer's toxic deal. They refused to be blinded. Instead, they used their own powerful ice magic to preserve themselves. They attempted to become immortal, much like the dragon priests, but using a different method, perhaps merging with the elemental spirits of the land. The result is the Wisp Mother, a creature that is half elf, half elemental, a lich of ice and sorrow. There is visual evidence for this. If you played the Thieves Guild questline and entered the inner sanctum of Erkenthand, you saw the massive statue of the Snow Elf. Compare that statue to a Wisp Mother. The robes, the posture, the floating grace. The silhouette is nearly identical. This recontextualizes every fight you have with them. You aren't fighting a monster. You are fighting the ghost of a civilization you destroyed. She is attacking you because you are a Nord. The invader, the barbarian who burned her city. The stolen children folklore might be a twisted memory of the Snow Elf children who were killed or enslaved. The Wisp Mothers are eternally searching for their lost kin. This leads to a chilling fan theory. The wisps that surround her aren't just minions. They are the souls of the Snow Elves who died in the area. The Wisp Mother acts as a beacon, collecting the fragmented spirits of her people. She's a mobile graveyard. When she dies, she dissolves into glow dust and wisp wrappings, leaving nothing behind. She returns to the elements. The geographic distribution supports this. Wisp mothers are most common in the Pale and the mountains, areas where the snow elves had their last strongholds. They are haunting the sites of their own extinction. The magic of the Wisp mother is unique. The cloning ability, where she splits into 3 shades, is a form of illusion magic that we rarely see elsewhere. It suggests a mastery of light manipulation. The Snow Elves worshipped Finisterre and Ciribane, ancestor gods, but they also revered the light. The Chantry of Auriel is all about light. The Wisp Mother has become a perversion of this. Instead of the warm, life-giving light of the sun, she radiates the cold, dead light of the moon and the frost. There is another layer to the legend, one that connects to the Nereids of other provinces. Nereids are water spirits, nature guardians. Some scholars in the Imperial City argue that Wisp Mothers are just the Skyrim version of Nereids, elemental manifestations of the land itself. If the land is frozen and hostile, the spirit becomes a Wisp Mother. If the land is warm and lush, it becomes a Spriggan or a Nereid. But the Wisp Mother feels too personal. Spriggans defend nature. Wisp Mothers defend specific ruins or items, like the Pale Blade. They have an agenda. They have memory. The horror of the Wisp Mother is the horror of the femme fatale trope twisted by necromancy. They are beautiful in a haunting way. They lure travellers into the swamps. Why? To feed, or simply to kill the interlopers? There is a book in the game, The Wisp Mother, which debates their nature. It suggests they might be Lich Queens of the Aelids, or ghosts of the First Era. But the Snow Elf theory remains the most poignant. It fits the tragedy of Skyrim. The land is haunted by the victims of the Nords' conquest. The Draugr are the Nords' own ancestors, cursing them from below. The Wisp Mothers are the Nords' victims, cursing them from the mist. And then there is the Pale Blade itself. The sword has a unique enchantment. It's not just frost damage, it weakens armour and causes fear. Why would a nature spirit forge a sword? She wouldn't. A priestess or a queen would. The blade is likely a Snow Elf artifact, preserved by the Wisp Mother against the rot of time. When you wield it, you're wielding a weapon designed to terrify humans. The Wisp Mothers also control the Wisps, those balls of light that drain your health. The mechanics here are interesting. The Wisp drains your life and transfers it to the Mother. It's a parasitic relationship. This mirrors the Draugr-priest relationship, but in a more elemental form. It seems that in ancient Skyrim, the secret to immortality was always steal someone else's life force. One encounter in the Labyrinthian, during the College of Winterhold quest, features a Wisp Mother inside the ruin. This places her in close proximity to the dragon cult. Did they coexist? Did the dragon priest tolerate these elven remnants? Or did the Wisp Mothers hide in the shadows, too powerful to be easily exterminated? The fight with a Wisp Mother is a dance. She floats backward, keeping her distance, peppering you with ice spikes while her shades confuse you. It's a fighting style that relies on evasion and misdirection. Very elven. A Nord warrior stands and bangs shield against shield. A Wisp Mother fades away. It's a clash of cultural combat styles that has persisted into the afterlife. In the end, the Wisp Mother represents the mystery of the old blood. The Nords call themselves the Sons of Skyrim, but the Wisp Mothers are the daughters of the land that was here before. They are the frost that refuses to melt. They are the reminder that this land was stolen, and the original owners are still watching from the fog, waiting for you to get lost. But not all ancient secrets are hostile ghosts or political scandals. Some are locked away in the ice itself, guarded by a tribe of Nords who rejected the wars of the mainland to live in harmony with the Allmaker. We need to travel even further north, to the island of Solstheim. We need to visit the Skaal. While the mainland Nords were building empires and shouting at dragons, the Skaal were perfecting a different kind of relationship with the divine, and they guard a material that is stronger than steel, colder than ice, and more valuable than gold. They guard the Stalhrim, and they know that if the secret of the enchanted ice gets out, the greed of the south will destroy their island. We leave the haunting mists of the mainland and take a boat to the one place in Skyrim that isn't technically Skyrim, Solstheim. If Skyrim is the wild north, Solstheim is the apocalyptic north. It's a schizophrenic island, half buried in the volcanic ash of Red Mountain, half frozen in a permanent blizzard, and living in the northern half in a village protected by wind barriers and stubbornness are the Skaal. The Skaal are the Nords that time forgot, or more accurately, the Nords who looked at civilization and decided they preferred the company of hawkers. They are an isolationist tribe who split from the mainland Nords eons ago. While the mainlanders were getting involved in the Alessian Empire, fighting civil wars and building stone cities, the Skaal were sitting in their tents, whittling and refining a theology that is arguably the most peaceful and sustainable in all of Tamriel. They worship the Allmaker. This is distinct from the Imperial Pantheon and even the animal totems. The Skaal believe in a single, benevolent creative force that flows through all things. The trees, the beasts, the wind, it's all the Allmaker. When a creature dies, its spirit returns to the Allmaker to be recycled. It's a beautiful, holistic view of the universe. But every god needs a devil, and the Skaal have the adversary. The adversary is the tester, the corrupter. He takes many forms. Sometimes he is the greedy man. Sometimes he is Thartag, the world devourer. But most often, and most dangerously, he is Mora. We know him as Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, the tentacled watcher in the void. To the Skaal, he isn't a cool quest giver who hands out skill books. He is Satan. He is the one who tempts you to hoard knowledge for yourself, breaking the cycle of nature. The Skaal believe that secrets are dangerous, which is ironic considering they are hiding one of the biggest secrets in the game. That secret is Stalhrim. You've seen it. That shimmering light blue material that looks like rock candy but hits like a truck. The game calls it enchanted ice, but that's a marketing term. Stalhrim is far more morbid than that. Here is a core in-game fact that should make you uncomfortable every time you craft a set of Stalhrim armor. Stalhrim is used almost exclusively for burials. Go to the source of Stalhrim on the map. It's a massive open-air amphitheatre of graves. The Nords of old didn't just dig a hole. They encased their honoured dead in this magical ice to preserve them perfectly. Stalhrim is terrifyingly hard. You can't mine it with a normal pickaxe. You need an ancient Nordic pickaxe, or a very steady hand with a notch. So when you craft a Stalhrim sword, you aren't just mining a vein of ore. You are in effect cracking open a sarcophagus, scooping up the magical preservative that was meant to protect an ancient hero and beating it into a weapon. You are wearing a coffin. The Skaal are the guardians of this technique. Only the village smith, Baldur Iron Shaper, knows the secret of how to work the material without shattering it. The quest, a new source of Stalhrim, is triggered because the Skaal are terrified that the secret has leaked. And who is trying to steal it? The Thalmor. Enter Ankarian, a Thalmor agent who is camping out on the coast, trying to map the Stalhrim deposits. The Thalmor wants Stalhrim because it is a magical insulator. It's lighter than ebony but offers similar protection. Imagine an army of high elves clad in armour that is immune to frost and amplifies their own enchantments. It's a tactical nightmare. This brings us to the game mechanics that reflect the lore. Stalhrim equipment gives a 25% bonus to frost enchantments placed on it. This is huge. If you put a chaos damage enchantment on a Stalhrim weapon, which includes frost, the entire enchantment gets buffed. Why? Because the material itself remembers the cold. It resonates with the stasis of death. There is a fan theory that Stalhrim is actually the tears of Kyne. The theory goes that when Shor died, Kyne cried, and her tears froze into this indestructible material. This would explain why it is holy to the Nords, and why it has such powerful magical properties. It's divine sorrow made solid. Another theory suggests that Stalhrim is a naturally occurring form of Ethereum, or at least a similar solid-state magicka, that only forms in the extreme conditions of Solstheim. It acts as a prism for magic, refracting it rather than absorbing it. The Skaal's refusal to use Stalhrim for war sets them apart from their mainland cousins. A Whiterun Nord would have mined that island hollow and outfitted every guard in the province. The Skaal treat it with reverence. They only use it when absolutely necessary. They understand that if you commodify the sacred, it loses its power. This friction is perfectly illustrated by the East Empire Company. They are the other faction trying to get their grubby hands on the ice. To the Empire, Solstheim is just a resource colony. They want the ebony from the Raven Rock mine, and they want the Stalhrim. The Skaal are the only thing standing between the island and total industrial strip mining. But the Skaal are fighting a losing battle. The Red Mountain is spewing ash that is slowly choking the southern forests. The ash spawn, monsters risen from the volcanic dust, are encroaching, and Hermaeus Mora is constantly probing their defences, trying to learn their secrets. The death of the Skaal shaman, Storn Cragstrider, is one of the most emotional moments in the Dragonborn DLC. He sacrifices himself to Hermaeus Mora. to give you the final word of power needed to defeat Miraak. He gives the adversary exactly what he wants: knowledge to save his people. It's the ultimate act of defiance against the Skaal's own dogma, breaking the rule to save the future. The Skaal represent what the Nords could have been if they hadn't become obsessed with conquest. They are peaceful, in tune with magic in their own way, and deeply communal, but they are also dying out. There are maybe 20 of them left in that village. They are a relic of the Merethic era, holding onto a glacier that is melting a little more every day, and yet they possess the knowledge of the Stalhrim source. This location is filled with Draugr, but not just any Draugr. These are the guardians of the ice. The king of the source is often a dragon priest or a high-ranking death lord. This implies that even the dragon cult valued Stalhrim. They used it for their VIPs. There is a lore note in the book Stalhrim, a new source, which speculates that Stalhrim might actually be hardened time. If we accept the theory that the north is where time slows down, Stalhrim might be pockets of reality where time has stopped completely. That's why it preserves the dead so well. It pauses their decay on a metaphysical level. When you wear it, you are wearing armour made of now. The Skaal teach us that the Nords' strength isn't just in their muscles or their shouts, it's in their endurance. The Skaal have survived the dragon cult, the Empire, the Dunmer refugees, the Red Year, and the return of the first Dragonborn. They are the bedrock of the North, but for all their wisdom, the Skaal deal with life. They try to preserve it. But the ultimate destination for every true Nord isn't a block of ice on an island, it's a hall in the sky. No matter how you live, whether you're a peaceful shaman or a bloodthirsty warlord, you eventually have to face the music, or rather, the Whalebone Bridge. We are nearing the end of our journey, and we must go where no living mortal is supposed to go. We're going to Sovngarde. We're going to see exactly what happens when the fighting stops and the feasting begins. And we're going to find out that heaven isn't exactly a place of rest. It's a gym that never closes. We have walked the frozen coasts, delved into the rotting barrows, and studied the forbidden magic of the ancients. Now we look up. High above the throat of the world, beyond the veil of the sky, lies the objective of every Nord life, Sovngarde. To call Sovngarde heaven is a bit of a mistranslation. Heaven usually implies peace, harps, and fluffy clouds. Sovngarde is a beer hall where you arm wrestle your ancestors. It is the plane of Etheria specifically carved out by Shor, Lorcan, for the souls of the valiant. Note the word valiant, not good, not kind, valiant. You can be a terrible person, a bandit, a mercenary, a ruthless king, and still get into Sovngarde if you die with a sword in your hand and no fear in your heart. Conversely, you can be a saint who spent their life feeding orphans, but if you die of old age in your bed shivering with fear, you might not make the cut. The entry requirements are strictly martial. This explains the entire psychology of the Nords. They don't fear death, they fear a boring death. Let's look at the entrance exam. When you arrive in Sovngarde during the main quest, the sky is a swirling nebula of colours, the music is a deep baritone chant, and the air is filled with mist. But before you can get a drink, you have to cross the Whalebone Bridge, and standing on that bridge is Tsun. Here is an in-game fact. Tsun is the Nordic god of trials against adversity. He is the shield thane of Shor, and he is huge. He stands about 7 feet tall, shirtless, looking like he benches mammoths for a warm-up. He stops you. He doesn't ask for a password. He says, "By what right do you request entry?" You have to fight him. You don't have to kill him. He's a god, you can't. But you have to prove you can take a hit. This is the ultimate vibe check. If you are weak, you don't get in. You wander the mists forever, looking at the warm lights of the hall but never tasting the roast ox. Once you pass Tsun, you enter the Hall of Valor. This building is the architectural peak of Nordic design. It's a cathedral of mead. Inside you find the heroes of history. Isgramor is there, though he doesn't speak to you much. Jurgen Windcaller is there. Olaf One-Eye is there. Even Ulfric Stormcloak or Galmar Stonefist can be there if you killed them in the Civil War. This confirms a major theological point. The Civil War doesn't matter in the afterlife. Stormcloak, Imperial. It makes no difference to Shor. Did you fight well? Did you believe in your cause? Good. Grab a mug. But where is Shor? Here is a piece of lore that actually appears in the dialogue if you listen closely. The heroes in the hall will tell you, Shor's high seat stands empty, his mien is too bright for mortal eyes. This is a polite way of saying that if you saw Shor, your head would explode. But there is a deeper reason. Shor is Lorcan. He is the missing god. He is technically dead in the mortal plane. His heart was at Red Mountain. But, in Aetherius, he is very much alive. However, during the crisis with Alduin, Shor has commanded the heroes not to fight. Why? The fan theory is that Shor knows the Kalpic cycle must happen. Alduin is supposed to eat the world. By interfering, the heroes might break the natural order, or perhaps Shor knew the last Dragonborn was coming. He knew that this was a duel between two shards of Akatosh, the Dragonborn and Alduin, and the fox, Shor, needed to stay out of the dragon's family drama. Sovngarde also serves as a sanctuary from the curse of the Draugr. We discussed how the dragon cult trapped souls in their bodies. Sovngarde is the opposite. It is total liberation. The souls here are golden, glowing, and fully restored. They suffer no pain. They are at their peak physical condition forever. However, Sovngarde is not without its threats. The main quest shows us that Alduin has been camping out in the mist, snacking on souls before they can reach the hall. This is the ultimate blasphemy. He is eating the Nord afterlife. This is why the heroes in the hall are so restless. They are watching their descendants get devoured on the doorstep of paradise. The atmosphere of Sovngarde is crucial. It's not just a place, it's a feeling. The music, Sovngarde, is sung in the dragon language, but the lyrics are about the land of the Nords. It sounds like a funeral dirge that turned into a victory march. It captures the melancholic joy of the Nord soul, the happiness that comes after the struggle. One interesting detail is the food. The tables are heaped with roasted meat and flowing mead. In many mythologies, spirits don't eat. In Sovngarde, eating is half the point. It reinforces the Atmoran obsession with survival. In Atmora, food was scarce. In Sovngarde, food is infinite. It is the anti-starvation. But what about the women? Is Sovngarde a boys' club? Absolutely not. Gormleth Goldenhilt is there, one of the three heroes who banished Alduin. She is just as loud and bloodthirsty as the men. Nordic egalitarianism extends to the afterlife. If you can swing an axe, you get a seat. There is a darker implication, though. If Sovngarde is only for the valiant, where do the farmers go? Where do the merchants go? Where do the bards who didn't fight dragons go? Do they go to the Dreamsleave to be recycled? Do they go to generic Aetherius? The game doesn't say. But it implies that for the average Nord peasant, Sovngarde is a hope, not a guarantee. This pressure to be worthy drives the culture of risk-taking. It's why Nords are always jumping off waterfalls or attacking giants. They are trying to punch their ticket. The final battle with Alduin takes place here. It is poetic. The World Eater is slain in the hall of the World Creator, Shor. The three ancient tongues, Gormleth, Hakon, Feldir, fight alongside you. It is a cross-generational team-up, the past and the present uniting to secure the future. When Alduin dies, he doesn't leave a skeleton. He explodes. His soul is not absorbed by you, it shoots up into the sky. This suggests that Alduin, as a fundamental force of the universe, cannot be truly destroyed, only reset. He returns to Akatosh. Leaving Sovngarde is bittersweet. Zun shouts you back to Nirn. You return to the throat of the world, to the cold and the wind. You have seen the promised land. You know it's real. This knowledge changes the Dragonborn. You aren't just a hero anymore. You're a witness. You know that death is not the end, but the beginning of the real party. Sovngarde is the anchor of a Nord identity. It validates all their suffering. The cold, the wars, the wolves, the Draugr. It's all worth it if you can just make it across that whalebone bridge. But we are still here. We are still in Skyrim. And as we look at the modern Nords, the Stormcloaks, the Imperials, the Farmers, and the Jarls, we have to ask, how much of this ancient history do they actually remember? And does the blood of Atmora still flow in their veins, or has it thinned out in the melting snow? We have reached the end of our history lesson, but the story is still being written. We have travelled from the freezing death of Atmora to the golden halls of Sovngarde. We have seen the rise of empires, the fall of kings, the madness of enchanters, and the quiet persistence of the Skaal. We have dug up the Draugr and flown with the dragons. Now we must bring it all back to the present, to the enduring Atmoran blood. When you walk into a tavern in Skyrim today, whether it's the Winking Skeever in Solitude or the Candlehearth Hall in Windhelm, you're looking at the remnants of a history that is thousands of years old. But how much of it is truly left? Modern Skyrim is a land in identity crisis. On one side, you have the Empire. They bring paved roads, organised trade, and the worship of the divines. They represent cosmopolitan Tamriel. On the other side, you have the Stormcloaks. They claim to fight for the old ways, for Talos, for the freedom of the Nords. But look closer at the Stormcloaks. They shout Skyrim belongs to the Nords. But do they know what that means? They worship Talos, an imperialised god. They don't worship the animal totems. They don't use the voice, except for Ulfric. They have forgotten the clever men. They are fighting for a memory of a memory. The true heritage of Atmora isn't in the politics. It's in the blood. It's in the racial passives. Let's look at the in-game fact. Nords have 50% resistance to frost. This isn't just a game mechanic. This is biological proof of their origin. Their bodies still remember the Atmora freeze. Every Nord walking around today is a biological monument to the survival of their ancestors. It's in the battle cry, the ability to send enemies fleeing in terror. This is a watered-down, primal version of the voice. It's the echo of the Dragon War resonating in the vocal cords of every Nord. But the old blood is fading. The giants are retreating to the mountains. The trolls are being hunted. The magic of the land is withdrawing. The return of the dragons was a wake-up call. It forced the Nords to remember who they used to be. It forced them to look at the sky and realise they are small. There is a melancholic beauty to Skyrim. It is a land of ruins. Everywhere you look, there is something broken. A fallen tower, a crumbled fort, a Draugr crypt. The Nords live in the skeleton of a greater past. They are squatters in their own history, but they are also resilient. The heritage of Atmora is the refusal to quit. It is the stubbornness that keeps a farmer planting crops in soil that freezes solid 6 months a year. It is the courage that makes a guard charge a dragon with a steel sword. There is a fan theory that the Nords are actually devolving. The ancient Atmorans were giants, lived for hundreds of years, and shouted mountains apart. Modern Nords are smaller, weaker, and die at 80. Is this the price of living in Tamriel? Or is it the Orc's curse we mentioned earlier, still slowly grinding them down? Or perhaps evolution isn't about power, it's about adaptation. The giant Atmorans couldn't survive in a changing world. The modern Nords can. They can trade, they can negotiate sometimes, they can build. They have traded raw power for survivability. The Dragonborn, you are the anomaly. You are the injection of pure ancient myth back into the bloodstream of the world. You are Isgrimor come again. You are the living proof that the magic hasn't left. It was just sleeping. When you shout, you are waking up the land. You are reminding the stones of the songs they used to hear. As we conclude this chronicle, think about the Nords not as generic barbarians, but as survivors of a cosmic trauma. They ran from the end of the world in Atmora. They fought for every inch of ground in Skyrim. They built a culture on the premise that the universe is trying to kill them, and they have to kill it right back. And they are still here. They are drinking mead, singing songs about Ragnar the Red, and complaining about their knees. But behind those eyes there is the glimmer of the ice. There is the memory of the longships. There is the knowledge that winter is coming, and when it does, they will be ready. The secrets of the Nords are not just in the books or the barrows. They are in the wind that howls through the mountain passes. They are in the crackle of the hearth fire. They are in the silence of the snow. So the next time you step out of a warm inn into the freezing night of Skyrim, take a deep breath. Feel the cold burn your lungs. That is the breath of Kine. That is the heritage of Atmora, and it belongs to you, Dragonborn. And so, the fire burns low in the hearth. The tales of kings and dragons, of ice ghosts and silent monks, drift upward like smoke, disappearing into the rafters. We have travelled a long way tonight, you and I, from the frozen shores of a dead continent to the golden tables of the afterlife, and back again to the snowy stillness of the here and now. It's easy to get lost in the noise of the day, the battles, the quests, the endless to-do lists that clutter our minds like a crowded inventory screen. But stories like these remind us that there is a deeper rhythm to the world, a slower, colder, more enduring pulse. The Nords know this rhythm well. They know that storms pass. They know that winter eventually yields to spring, even if it takes a long time. And they know that as long as you have a warm fire and a good story, you can withstand just about anything. Take a moment now to let your own shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Let the tension of the day melt away like frost under the morning sun. You're safe here. The Draugr are locked in their tombs. The dragons are just shadows in the clouds. The world outside can wait. Tonight, you're not the Dragonborn. You're not the saviour of the world. You're just a traveller resting by the fire, listening to the wind outside, safe and warm. The history is written, the ancestors are at peace, and soon you will be. 2. Let the darkness wrap around you like a heavy fur cloak. Let the quiet settle in. The stars are watching over you, just as they watched over Ysgramor, just as they watched over the lonely peaks of Solstheim. Rest now. The adventure will be there when you wake up. Sweet dreams.